call this meeting to order. It is now 9:10 a.m. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for being here and introduce you to the members of the commission, beginning on my far right.
Oh, hi, I'm Carrie Ann Canch.
Good morning, Patricia Ortiz.
Good morning, Vivian Salaga.
Hi, Tom Placan.
Good morning, Dominique Cobb.
We have in our packets the minutes of the previous meeting, and if any of the commissioners have any comments or corrections to make to those minutes, please offer those now. And seeing none, then the minutes are accepted as submitted. The next is the announcements by Dennis Fernandez.
Good morning, Commissioners, and our visitors here this morning. We appreciate your patience in accommodating both social distancing and our additional health steps that will be implemented throughout the hearing today. I did want to make you aware that during the public comment portion of the hearing, you'll be allowed to speak for 3 minutes. There'll be a timer that will be placed at the beginning of your comment, and then run for the total time that you speak. We are going to be somewhat spacing the speakers to only allow 3 of you all at one time to be standing in queue for the podiums. You'll be able to speak from both podiums. You can alternate, at which time the podium that was just used would be sanitized. All the facilities here are being sanitized throughout the hearing, and we do appreciate your additional patience as we go through these additional steps. I did want to make you aware this morning as well. There was an original agenda that went out that had a case number HPC 2002-02 for the property located at 5135 Califerro, which is fire station number 7. That was originally being requested for demolition review as well, and that request was withdrawn on Thursday the 4th, June 4th, by the agent for the owner. I didn't want to make you aware of that in case that information did not get out into the community. We did revise the agenda today to just have the single case, which is the demolition review for the Seminole Heights Baptist Church building at 801 East Hillsborough Avenue under HPC 2020-01. We do have our annual election of officers scheduled for this morning as well. I would recommend, Madam Chair, that be delayed to the end of the hearing so that we can get through the speakers that we have here today in the presentation.
I agree. Do we need to have a vote on that?
If you could just vote to amend the agenda as discussed.
I'll make a motion to move the elections to the latter portion of the hearing.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Kamaria Pettis-Mackel. I'm an assistant city attorney with the city attorney's office. At this time, can any of the commission members state for the record whether or not they have any conflicts of interest based on the item that's on the agenda? For the record, I don't see or hear. Madam Commissioner?
I had been contacted by the editor of Creative Loafing via email, and I forwarded that email on to staff for their response to the inquiry.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Did you at any point respond to that email?
I did not.
Okay. Are there any other comments or?
Well, by copy of the email to the originator, he knew that I was forwarding it to Dennis.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And just again, there's been no other conflicts of interest from the commissioners?
None.
Okay.
Over here.
Additionally, can any of the commissioners announce for the record if there has been any ex parte communication regarding the item that's on the record?
None.
Just for the record, I see no comments or anything from the commissioners. Thank you.
We will swear in at this point in time all those who wish to make public comment. For those people who are not present in the room but may show up later, how will that swearing in be handled?
I believe we're going to have to do multiple swearings this morning.
Okay.
So we'll try to monitor the flow of individuals through the room. We would ask that once you do speak, if you're able to leave the room, to allow other people who are out in the lobby areas to come in so that they can participate in the hearing. We would appreciate that as well. The room is limited in the number of people that can be in the room at one time. So we will have to have individuals exiting the room to allow the other individuals to enter the room. With that, if everyone could stand and raise your right hand for the swearing, Beverly Jusak will administer it, including staff. And with that, I believe we're ready for our case.
I believe at this point we will be having our staff presentation on the matter before us this morning.
Did want to just briefly go through how the hearing will work this morning. We'll begin with a staff presentation, which the salient points of the property and the application will be discussed, as well as the relevant code sections. When the staff concludes this presentation, which would be facilitated through a PowerPoint, the applicant's agent will be presenting before the board. They will introduce their evidence and exhibits, and I believe they have an expert testimony to provide as well. Following the conclusion of that portion of the presentation, we will receive public comment. As I said, public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per individual. Following the conclusion of public comment, the petitioner will be allowed time for rebuttal, if that is necessary. Following the rebuttal time, the board may question any witnesses that it feels necessary. It may ask questions of both the staff, anyone who provided any type of testimony, including the public. And then the chairman may call to order any party before the board who is deemed out of order. At this point, we would be closing the public hearing, and all testimony of the applicants and the witnesses will be weighed by the board in discussion, and then the board would move to making a motion. Do we have any questions about the process this morning? We'll be here to assist as well. We will start with a staff presentation. Elaine Lund will begin the presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. Elaine Lund with the Historic Preservation Commission staff. The item on the agenda that we are here to review this morning is a demolition review for the Seminole Heights Baptist Church located at 801 East Hillsborough Avenue. We received an application, I believe on March 13th, from Ms. Julia Mandel, who is here as the church's agent, to request a demolition review for this property. I believe the application has been submitted into the record. And let's see. We have a PowerPoint presentation this morning. If we could get that up on the screen, thank you. So this is I believe, a postcard of the Seminole Heights Baptist Church, which dates from, well, the photo must date sometime prior to 1977. There's a posting stamp on it on the front for some reason. But this is the church, as most people are familiar with it from this view from Hillsborough Avenue. This is an aerial photograph from 2020 of the church property and its proximity to Hillsborough Avenue, I-275, Taliaferro Avenue, Nebraska Avenue, and Giddens Avenue. So Hillsborough is to the north, Taliaferro is directly to the west, Nebraska Avenue is to the east of the property, and Giddens Avenue is to the south. The buildings that are under consideration here are the primary church structures, the original auditorium or sanctuary, and the two subsequent education buildings that were additions to the original the 1949 structure. We have some aerials, some historic aerials here. This is 1957. Here's the area. You can see the main roads there, and that's the block that's where the church is these days. In 1965, you can see the area being cleared for the interstate, and by 1973, there's the interstate. Hillsborough Avenue has been widened, and by 1980, this is pretty much the configuration of those three buildings, or one building and two large additions, as they sit on the property today. This is a Sanborn map, a fire insurance company map from 1922, showing the wood frame building where the church initially held its services. There's a 1925 photo here of that building. You can see sort of behind it there were some additions that were done to it to expand for the growing church. In the 1931 Sanborn map below, you can see those additions to the structure. It's was originally a one-story wood frame structure, and they expanded to the rear, to the south, and to the east. The building that's present today was initially constructed from 1948 and finished in 1949. The image on the right is an advertisement that ran in the Tampa Tribune for the unveiling of the model for the proposed new buildings for the church. You can see that they are somewhat similar to how the church was eventually built. Obviously, there are changes done, especially when it's a couple of years from when the model's unveiled to when the construction begins. But in the photo on the left from 1949, you see the original steeple or bell tower of the church being constructed. So this is toward the end of its construction. And then we have finished photos here. One angle from 1949. This is looking southwest at the building from Hillsborough Avenue, and then from 1950 looking southeast at the building. Note that the steeple at that time is capped by a dome. This is the 1951 Sanborn map, the next available year of the Sanborn maps. You can see that the original wood frame building and its additions are still on the site, and at this time you see the newer building, the 1949 building, in its place at the corner of Hillsborough Avenue and Taliaferro Avenue. And this is a shot looking down Hillsborough Avenue. This is from east of Nebraska, so looking toward the church in the distance, and you can see the tower then rising above the adjacent buildings, the landscaping, the trees, and beyond. This is a really interesting photo. It's a series that were done for some of the road projects within the city at that time. So the next Sanborn map that's available is from 1976, and by this point, the church has acquired most of the property on the block, which is the same property, I believe, that it has today. You see that the original wood frame building is gone, but some of its addition is still left. The two rectangular buildings to the right were acquired by the church for educational building purposes. They were formerly apartments. There are two wood frame buildings south facing Giddens Street, and there's a photo of one of them in the corner, the bottom left corner of the screen there, the Babyland facility, the nursery for the church. And then you see the whole complex as it sits today, shown on this 1976 map. And the photo above the site up there, that's the Canvas Cathedral, which was used to hold services while the church was being renovated in 1958 and 1959. That was not located on this site. I believe it was about a block away. But, so in 1958 and 1959, the church entered into a series of renovations. There was a new pastor at this time, and he, excuse me, under his direction, or the church and the trustees' direction, of course, the church proceeded with doing some interior renovations, including adding the stereophonic sound system, some modifications to the choir area, and also there was a change noticeably in the steeple. The small cap that was placed up there in the 40s was replaced with the tall spire that is still in place atop the church today. The front portico with the neoclassical revival style two-story columns and the pediment above that was placed in front of the original building at this time. And also in 1959, the first educational building was constructed, and that would be the one that is to the southeast of the building. The 76 Sanborn map also shows the 1976 addition to the church in place, and the note on there, just of course difficult to see here, is that was drawn from plans at that time. So when the Sanborn map was drawn, the building was probably not quite completed. So here you can see, this is color-coded, the 1949 construction in those light blue areas. In 1959, the education building and porch and steeple were added. And in 1976, you see the addition of the second educational building. So these are some general views of the church today, or within the past couple of years. These are taken from the Google Street View service. And I think one or two of them are from 2018, so more or less pretty recent. So you can have a view of these, the west and north elevations of the church. It's in the upper left there. You see Hillsborough Avenue on the left side of the image, and Taliaferro runs in the foreground there. I believe this image is taken from the interstate adjacent to the property. Below that, this picture is also taken from the interstate. So you see the primarily the west side of the building, with the original building, the fire station sort of tucked in between the original portion and then the 1976 portion to the south there. In the upper right are the east and north elevations. So this would be looking from about Hillsborough Avenue and Miami Avenue. You can see the north side of the church along Hillsborough Avenue and the east elevations of the church with the 1959 additions there. And then the bottom right picture is the east and south elevations of the church. This is taken from about the parking lot entrance on Giddens. So you see mostly what you see there is the 1959 building addition, and you see the steeple beyond in the background, and then a bit of the 1970s building just to the left in the back. So these are some views taken by staff earlier this year. These are the main structure, the main sanctuary here. We have the full facade there in the center of the east elevation, a view of just the portico addition from the 1959 building effort in the upper left. On the upper right, it's a view of the west elevation of the church there. And then on the bottom right, this is just a portion of the north elevation. That's actually the corner of the base of the steeple. So, one of the few notable changes to the structure is that the doors that originally faced Hillsborough Avenue on this north side have been filled in so that they're no longer in use. Too far. Can we go back? One more? Thank you. So this is the first education building that was built in 1959, or finished in 1959. The upper right, you can see the connector, which was actually part of the 1940s construction. So that connector was already in place before the 1950s building efforts were underway. And then, so you have the main auditorium or sanctuary on the right side of that image, the portico and the education building that were done in 1959, also in that image. Below that, the bottom right picture, you have the north and east elevations of that education building. And then on the left side, we have an image of the south elevation. And you can see that there have been some modifications to that side, but that is definitely not the primary elevation of the church. It's on Giddens, which I think of as more of the rear of the church, but that may not be everybody's opinion. And then we have the education building from 1976 on the left there is the elevation on the west. This is running along Taliaferro Avenue, so the fire station would be just to your left off the shot there, and Giddens would be down to the right. The upper right shows the west and south elevations, so there's a playground, if you're familiar with the property, just to the south, just to the right of what you see in that image. That's the side facing Giddens. And then the east elevation of that addition is shown in the bottom right image. This building when it was built as an addition pretty firmly up against the 1959 portion. So it is, there's no highly visible east elevation of this structure since it was connected to the building, and the north side is also not visible due to its proximity to the fire station, really. Okay. And just like to note that with the plan of the building, you can see that the 1949 edition is fairly prominent, and I'm sorry, the 1959 edition is fairly prominent, and this was built within the 50-year review time that we usually consider for items that are being listed in the National Register. It's one of their standards there. So when we look at this structure, you see the original portions of it from the 1940s and then the additions from the 1950s, and those all fall within the area, the period that we would consider to be the appropriate historic period. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you, Lane. Just for the benefit of the commissioners, I just wanted to walk through the staff report for just a moment. Obviously, a lot of the information that Elaine was talking about is in the staff report. The first 2 pages of the staff report deal mainly with the parcel details and the relevant processes that are basically in play during this morning's hearing. That would be any National Register criteria considerations, a reference to the various reports that will be referenced throughout the hearing, As you move on to the third page, that is the National Register criteria, condensed version of that for you. That will be utilized throughout the discussions this morning as well. Moving on to the fourth page, that is Section 27-257 of the City of Tampa Code Ordinances, which deals with criteria necessary to qualify as a landmark site, multiple property designation, historic conservation overlay district, or historic district. And then we have some attachments to the staff report as well. We have the excerpt from the Cultural Resource Assessment Survey that was done, which was one of the references in determining eligibility for this particular property when it went through demolition review. The excerpt that we included deals with the church site, specifically the sanctuary and the education building. So there's additional pages that lead to a letter from the Florida Department of Transportation to the Federal Highway Authority. Basically, the letter is concurring with the conclusions of the report. You have the detail of that discussion and some exhibits attached to that as well. And then the last page should be an email that was received from the owner's agent, Ms. Mandel, that was directed to her from Timothy Parsons. I did want to bring your attention that Timothy Parsons is the State Historic Preservation Officer for the state of Florida. National Register eligibility is principally determined by the State Historic Preservation Office in conjunction with the National Register Review Board. So obviously their participation noted in the email and their observations are relevant to today's discussion. Can go back to the PowerPoint, please. Okay, just a short recap is that what triggers this process this morning, what triggered this, was a request by the property owner to determine if the buildings on the site could be demolished. That does come to the Historic Preservation Division, and we review that against criteria within the code, specifically under Section 27-260, which is titled Emergency Actions to Protect Buildings, Sites, Structures, or Objects, meeting the criteria for designation. And we're dealing with buildings today. This morning we're dealing with buildings. In my office, we review any structure that's 50 years or older against the criteria under this section. In this case, it did determine that with the resources that we had available, it did meet criteria set forth in 27-260, specifically Section B, and that is the catalyst for this process that we're dealing with today. Under 27-260B reads that a building, site, structure, or object of architecture or historical or archaeological significance, if it meets any of these three criteria, it rises to the level of a full commission review for determination of the board's evaluation if it should be set forth into an emergency action before City Council. So the criteria are listed here. I won't go into those in depth. You have those within your staff report, but I will say that the one that met the criteria for this particular property was Roman numeral 2, which says that the property meets the criteria for individual listing on the National Register of Historic Places, which has not been locally designated under the provisions of this chapter. We did rely upon the cultural resource assessment survey that was produced by Janus Research, which is a cultural resource company that's been in existence for, I would say, about 25 years or so. They are well known in the world of cultural resource surveying, and they do participate in a lot of the different assessments that are done, particularly in reference to interstate expansion. This particular segment of their study dealt with the interchange from I-275, I-4 northward towards Beers Avenue. You do see in their map in the staff report 9-92, where the property is outlined in a red line, and you see the pink and red lines that kind of form the boundary along the interstate. That's referred to as the area of potential effect, and they are looking at any potential cultural resources within that area and making a determination of adverse impact by whatever the prospective FDOT project may be that's being considered. Here's an aerial superimposed with a circle of the subject property that kind of shows you the immediate study area along north and south of Hillsborough Avenue and their area of focus. There we go. Janus Research concluded in its evaluation of the property that the Seminole Heights Baptist Church is considered eligible for individual listing in the National Register. It did call to mind that typically religious properties are considered ineligible for listing in the National Register, as historic significance cannot be established on the merit of religious doctrine. And I will review that in the bulletin in just a moment. However, according to National Register Bulletin 15, under Criterion A, a religious property that derives primary significance from architectural or artistic distinction or historical importance may be eligible for listing in the National Register. It says that this Seminole Heights Landmark Church is a good example of neoclassical revival architecture. The original circa 1949 gable sanctuary features little alteration. And then it goes on to talk about the flat roof and the additions. So you'll see often in their report that they refer just to pre-1965. That's because the report was being developed in 2015, and anything before 1965 would be considered potentially eligible for listing on the National Register. I think Elaine did a great job of kind of defining that period a little bit more accurately. I did want, is this my phone? Can you hear me? I did want to take a moment to talk about the relevant criteria. If we could keep the PowerPoint on, please. Thank you. Your first role this morning will be to determine if the subject property does meet the criteria for the National Register of Historic Places under particularly Criterion C. That was the area that the Janus Research did to identify significance. Criterion C, and I'm just go to the Alamo for a moment, please. I am reading from the National Register Bulletin. This is Bulletin number 15, which directs individuals on how to apply National Register criteria for evaluation. want to read the criterion. The criteria for evaluation is the quality of significance in American history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, and culture that is present in districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects that possesses integrity of location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And then you have your 4 criteria, A, B, C, and D. I won't read all of them, but I will focus on C. C is properties that embody the distinctive characteristic of a type of period or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possesses high artistic values, or that represents a significant distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. On page 18 of that document, in the applying the criteria for criterion C, under design and construction, features guidance on the distinctive characteristics of the type of period and method of construction. And it reads, this is the portion of criterion C under which most properties are eligible, for it encompasses all architectural styles and construction practices. To be eligible under this portion of the criterion, a property must clearly illustrate the distinctive characteristics of the following: the pattern of the features common to our particular class of resources. Next, the individual or variation of features that occurs within the class. Next, the evolution of that class. Or the last is the transition between classes of resources. And it provides the distinctive characteristics are physical features or traits that are commonly reoccur in individual types, periods, and methods of construction. To be eligible, a property must clearly contain enough of those characteristics to be considered a true representative or of a particular type, period, or method of construction. Characteristics can be expressed in terms such as form, proportion, structure, plan, style, or materials. They can be general, referring to ideas of design and construction, such as basic plan or form, or they can be specific, referring to precise ways of combining particular kinds of materials. So we are dealing with the significance of the built structure under this criterion, and emphasizing the stylistic elements that are represented today in the existing structure, the current structure, and considering changes that may have occurred over time. I did mention that under the criteria for a religious property, there's a special consideration that's illustrated within these guidelines. I'll read from page 26 under criteria considerations for religious properties. It says, a religious property requires justification on architectural, artistic, or historic grounds to avoid any appearance of judgment by government about the validity of any religion or belief. Historic significance for a religious property cannot be established on the merits of a religious doctrine, but rather for architectural and artistic values or for important historic or cultural forces that the property represents. And following on that, I did want to provide you some information on what those architectural and artistic distinctions rely upon. That is on page 28 of bulletin number 15. It does read, a religious property significant for its architectural design or construction should be evaluated as other properties under criterion C, that it should be evaluated within an established architectural context, and that if necessary, it can be compared to other properties of its type, period, or method of construction. So one of your roles this morning would be to determine if individually this property rises to that level of being distinct, or it relies upon comparisons to similarly situated period relevant architectural references. And there is additional guidance, as I had mentioned, integrity and the essential physical features are an important element of determining if a property does meet the criterion. I did want to provide you just a short paragraph on page 46 of Bulletin 15. It says, a property important for illustrating our particular architectural style or construction technique must retain most of the physical features that constitute that style or technique. A property that has lost some historic materials or details can be eligible if it retains the majority of features that illustrate its style in terms of massing, spatial relationships, proportions, patterns of windows and doors, textures of materials, and ornamentation. The property is not eligible, however, if it retains some basic features conveying massing, but that has lost the majority of the features that once characterized its style. And I believe that's a consideration with the introduction of the additions that occurred in 1959. So your first, excuse me, it's a little louder than the other one. Your first task this morning is going to be to determine if the property meets the criteria for designation that I just outlined for you. If you determine that the property does not meet the criteria, then you will instruct staff to approve the demolition permit when presented. If you determine that the property does meet the criteria, then you will request City Council to take emergency action to review the threat of demolition. In that motion, you would need to submit information to City Council supporting the statement that irreparable harm will be done to the property if a demolition permit is issued. And then we will need to submit to City Council all information available regarding the property's eligibility for local designation as well. The last couple slides deal with the criteria for local designation under 257. This property was initially constructed more than 50 years ago. So if it does have the determination of eligibility for the National Register, that criterion is very similar to what the local criteria reflects. You can see under, instead of C, it's marked Roman numeral 3. And that language is the same as what's reflected at the National Register listing, but it is more focused on the local significance. This second part of your responsibilities this morning will only take place if you determine that the building meets the criteria for designation on the National Register. Lastly, I did want to call to attention, and I believe the applicant's agent will go into this in more detail. Originally, when the Cultural Resource Assessment Survey was completed, there was a conflict in the language within the survey, within the text, which is within your staff report. It is determining that the property was eligible for the National Register under the criteria that I reviewed. However, in their site form, they did check that it was ineligible. So the applicant's agent did request from Dr. Parsons, the SHPO, some clarity on that, and you have that email on the last page. You can review that. I will call to attention the bullets, and for the benefit of the audience, I'll go ahead and summarize those. It says, after reviewing the available information, my opinion can be summarized as follows. The church is potentially eligible for the National Register. Although modifications have been made over time, the architecture does not look exactly how it was when the church was initially constructed to be eligible. It does not have to look exactly how it was. The current facade appears to date from the mid-1950s remodeling of the church, which took place over 50 years ago. It is an excellent example of neoclassical revival architecture as applied to a church as seen from the exterior. He does then go on to speak of some other points dealing with the compatibility of the facade and some potential social history eligibility that he suggests may be further evaluated. So with that, that concludes my staff summary, and I believe now we're going to hear from the applicant's agent. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add at this point in time that if any of the commissioners would like to take a short recess at any point during the proceedings, please just speak up and say so. We'll take a quick recess and then convene back and continue the hearing. Good morning and welcome. Yeah, your mic must not be on.
Very good. My name, for the record, is Julia Mandel. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Gray Robinson, 401 East Jackson Street, Tampa, Florida. I am here representing the Seminole Heights Baptist Church, and I want to make that very clear for the record because there's been some questions about why we are here and what is the purpose behind this hearing. I also have here with me Pastor Brant Adams, who is the pastor of the Seminole Heights Baptist Church, as well as Edward Browder, who is with the consulting firm of S&ME. He is a historic preservation consultant as well. He has provided some evidence in the record. I think Dennis did an excellent job really describing this entire process because it is somewhat confusing in terms of the way the code is drafted and in terms of what your role is. But I think I should give you a little background as to what happened to get us here, because I think it is a little bit of an unusual situation. This property was analyzed, both the property where the church is and also where the fire station is, was analyzed as part of a cultural resource assessment in reviewing whether or not they were going to expand 275. So this was not an analysis done for a determination of preservation. It was really done for the purposes of making a determination of what resources are out there should there be an expansion of 275 that could affect those resources. And to make the long story short of that, if they find potentially resources out there, should they have gone forward to expand 275, there would have been a secondary process that would have been gone through. It's called the 106 process, for those of you who are familiar with it. So this determination and what was put in that report was not done for the purposes of a full determination for listing in the National Register. It was simply done to identify properties for that purpose if they had to go into a further process. So that being said, it is something that does exist, and it is something that needs to be dealt with. Now, for the record, my client was never aware, the Seminole Heights Baptist Church was never aware that this process was taking place. They had no opportunity to be involved in that process. This is not a process, it's a public hearing process. This is not a process that you speak with the church or another property owner and find out information, because they are not seeking at that point in time to move forward with a listing. They're not seeking at that point in time for a determination of criteria. So yes, there is that report that exists out there, and as Dennis noted, in 2015, there was some confusion as to whether or not the church property was eligible for listing, and that is why I did contact the state. But I think that's important for you to know, and also for members of the public to know, that this came up as part of a due diligence process where there was a contract purchaser, a potential contract purchaser, who went forward to the city as part of their due diligence to determine what could be done on this property. And it was at that moment in time that this was determined as you would suspect it would, because at that point in time, you've got a property that's over 50 years old, and although there was not a demolition permit, and for the record, there doesn't exist a demolition permit outstanding, this was done as part of that due diligence. So at that point in time, I was retained to come into the process and make give legal advice and make some determinations, because there was some conflicts in the reports, and because procedurally, they were in a position where the church really has to figure out what property rights it has. I mean, they have owned this property for a very long time, 100 years, and Pastor Adams will get up and describe just some of the history of the church. But procedurally, I thought it was important for you to understand why we were here and what led to this. And so it is very important for the commission to understand that its role today is actually to sit in the shoes of what would traditionally be part of a federal government process and evaluate these criteria and actually make a finding, which is a little different than some of the other ways things come to you. And I don't, I was with the city for a very long time. I was the attorney for the HPC for a very long time. And I can't recall ever being in this situation specifically where you had a property that came forward to you not because it was already part of a listing or it was in a district or individually it had some evaluation needed for that purpose, but was in fact something identified through a secondary process where really no finding has been made, just a determination of it's eligible, potentially eligible, we can take those words around. So I do think Dennis did a great job, and I also, within the packet that I gave you, go through all of those items because you actually have to be in that process to actually make those findings. And the other thing I do want to just state for the record, and I've read a lot of the letters and I understand viscerally that especially the steeple has meaning to the community. I live in Tampa Heights. I understand. I drive by it all the time. So I understand the visceral nature and the feeling of the steeple. I'm not really sure, and I haven't really read a lot, that the other elements of the building have that level of import to the community. It really is the steeple, maybe the facade. But it's really important to remember that there is no facade designation. There is no designation of a piece of a building. It's either all or it isn't designated. And I understand that a lot of folks will want to talk about the idea of different uses for the existing structure and different ways that it can be repurposed. That's not your role, and that can't be your role. Your role is a very simple one. It either meets the criteria, and therefore we should move this forward for the purposes of local designation to the city council, or it doesn't. And it's the building as a whole, the elements as a whole, the history of a whole, and also looking at this in a historical context. Through my presentation that you've seen in the documents I've given you, I think something that was missing as part, there's a couple things that were missing as part of the original analysis that Janice undertook. One, they were not aware that the elements that I think are the elements that really everybody's looking at for this, for the neoclassical revival design, those are additions. They were not part of the original building. The original building was built in 1948-49 period. They had grand plans, as you see from some of the advertisements, but they didn't effectuate those plans. 10 years later, they put elements on, the porch and the pillars. Those were additions. The steeple actually was not original. I have been told, and Pastor Adams could probably reiterate that there was a fire that did have an effect on the original steeple. So the steeple that everybody has a visceral feeling about today is not original to the building. So really the question you're facing is not whether or not, as indicated in the Janice report, this is a good example of neoclassical revival. There's lots of good examples out there. Some of them are church buildings, some of them are bank buildings on Dale Mabry. And you can debate what is a good example of neoclassical revival. But that is not what your role is today. Your role is to make a determination is whether or not this has distinctive characteristics of the type, period, and methods of construction. And also that there's two parts of it, the distinction and that it derives, this building derives its primary significance from its architecture. And there's a reason why in the Code of Federal Register as well as the bulletin, there's an additional review for churches. church buildings are more public-type buildings. They have more visceral effect. If this was a bank building, maybe the fact that this architecture exists may not be as interesting. It probably wouldn't have a steeple, but who knows? But the bottom line is you're to look at this as in a more heightened way. And I go through that in my packet, but I think the thing you really need to look at it is not just the context of this location or the context of the building as it stands today, but it needs to be looked at because of the historical context. It's not, and additionally, it's not in a district. It is not part, and it could have been made part of the district. It was never made part of the district. This particular building in this particular location. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, and I don't know that that's worth getting into. But you're obligated to also look at it in a historical context. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, because when you look at this particular church, at this particular location, which was constructed originally in 1949, and then added on to in 1958, and there were other additions on the property, and this property has morphed over time. Buildings have been built, buildings have been removed. When you look at it at that particular location for that church, the fact that it's been a church that many years isn't really as important as the construction of the church and what it looks like. And I do believe it's very important to look at that historical context, and you're obligated, as I described, to look at it as it relates to other structures. And I have provided in your packet other structures, other churches that were built within this time frame, from the time frame of 1949 to 1969, all of which, under the way Janice has identified how this property is eligible for designation as a good example of neoclassical. And I'll direct your attention, I don't know if does the Elmo work? So I can put these up, because I think it's important for folks to see it if they can. And I'm going to take a little time and go through these, because I think that's really important for not just for you to understand, but for folks in the audience to understand. In a vacuum in this location, to the folks who live in Seminole Heights, yes, this is a structure they look towards. But in your review, as you look at the historical context, I was able to identify 5 churches that were built, and this was a very quick Google search, 5 churches that were built in boundaries of the city of Tampa, 2 within either the Tampa Heights or the Seminole Heights area, through the time frame of 1949 to 1969, all of which one would suggest are good examples of neoclassical architecture. Move this over here, but I do speak loud. This first church is the Manhattan Baptist Church, located on Manhattan, down in the South Tampa area. I believe it was built, I had the listing, in 1968. And contains many of the same classical features as the Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I apologize, I went backwards. Let me start at the beginning. Just take a moment here. This is the New Salem Primitive Baptist Church. This was built in 1969. I couldn't get the picture which included the entire steeple, although I do understand the steeple may have been hit by a tornado at one point in time. So I'm not sure it exists in this exact format. This was built in 1969. This is on Nebraska Avenue. And that's A. This is B under your packet. This is the Bayshore Baptist Church. This was built in 1955. I'm not an architectural expert, so whether or not this is a pure example of neoclassical revival or not, I'll leave to folks other than me. But it certainly has some of the same elements with the columns, with the steeple. It actually arguably is more centered, which from what I've read about neoclassical architecture is something that is important. And one would say that this is not just a good example. In fact, I would argue that it's an excellent example and is something that really stands out among those types of churches that were built. I'm going to go into C, the Central Baptist, Tampa Baptist Church, built in 1960, which actually is walking distance from my house. And frankly, until I went through this process, I probably drove by it 500 times and never even really paid attention. But it also has the same features, built in a similar time frame with its steeple. It doesn't have the same type of additions which take it out of juxtaposition. It is what I have read to be a more pure form. This next picture is of the Hyde Park Presbyterian Church, and this was built in 1949. Now, I do think it's important to point out that this church actually is within the Hyde Park Historic District, and it is a non-contributing structure. It was determined to be a non-contributing structure. One, again, might suggest that this is a more excellent example of neoclassical, but also the fact that when you look at the time periods, and Seminole Heights has a similar time period associated of significance, which typically went till about the late 30s, early 40s. These types of structures, although really beautiful, I wouldn't suggest they're not, didn't have that same necessity to be looked at as contributing to a district or having that status of a landmark. And the last one I put in here is the Manhattan Baptist Church, and as I said, that was built in 1968. What concerns me significantly about the way the state handled this, and I do think the state has put us all in a very uncomfortable position, is that their analysis was simply a drive-by analysis. There's no evidence behind it. They don't go through the criteria. They don't talk about historical context. They don't allow anybody to have an understanding of why it should be listed, if it met, or how it met the criteria. And as a result of that, you're placed in that position, which is something that you need to go through and understand how all of these things meet together. And in terms of making that determination, you are looking at the following items. You are looking at the fact that the original structure of this church did not contain many of the elements. And there were additions, and as Dennis pointed out, that is part of your consideration. And although those elements were put in during this 50-year time frame, they did add on to an additional, into a structure. They were sort of put on. They weren't part of the structure. There were also additional additions, which I realize is kind of an odd thing to say, but over time, this property has been added on to. When you look at some of these other structures, they're a little bit more in a pure format, except potentially the Manhattan Baptist Church. So what I'm saying to you is you have evidence in your record which shows what the criteria are. I think the things to be looking at are the distinction and the significance, and whether or not those meet those criteria. And additionally, the historical context. And looking at it in terms of the fact that, interestingly, 4 other Baptist churches built within this time frame all look relatively similar. And what makes this church any more or less a good example of neoclassical architecture than those other churches? Because you really then, if you did make the decision to move this forward, you're really creating a precedent. So now what we're saying really is within the city of Tampa, if you have a church of a certain age that is an example of neoclassical architecture, we really should be saying, not only we'll just wait till someone wants to tear them down, you probably need to be making a decision to go forward with a program of designating those structures. And whether or not that's something as a policy decision you want to do is really within your bailiwick and ultimately city councils. But right now, we're not talking about something that's been there for 100 years or has a distinction or has something more than any other property of this type in this area. It means something to the community, and I do not take away from that, and I understand that. And I understand that a lot of folks would like to see the steeple continue to exist in the location that it is. A lot of folks would like to see this property redeveloped. But at the end of the day, the church has been stewards of this property for a very long time. I have put evidence in the record, although at this point in time, I'm not asking you to make a determination of economic hardship, because there needs to be a determination first of whether or not this is even meeting the criteria. Unlike some of the other situations where we know it meets the criteria so we can move forward with an economic hardship, there has to be a first determination of meeting the criteria. But you will see in your backup, this property has had troubles meeting its repair needs. It's a shrinking congregation. Now, the pastor can speak more about that. You have a property that is going to be incredibly expensive to fix, to bring up to current code, whether or not it stays as a church or some adaptive use would come of it. But secondarily, you have a property appraiser on this that is 50% what that is. It's about an $8 million cost to fix and about a 3.8 or 3.9 million determination of what the property is worth, just the land. I don't know what that would look like if you put one on top of the other, because if you can't remove the structure, and again, the fire station is a separate issue, and we have withdrawn that, and we've recognized that, in fact, that does meet the criteria. And I think that that was an important recognition, because there is a distinction with a difference on those two items. So what I'm suggesting to you is you have to look at it in the context of the criteria, but also from the folks in the audience who do want to see this saved, have an understanding that you're not going to be able to really use this property for something else. And although that's not your role to look at, I wanted to say that for the purposes of the audience. I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Adams right now so that he can give a little history of the church.
Please use the other podium.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Brant Adams. I'll get to it in a second, but as Ms. Julia just said, just know.
Please, I'm sorry, excuse me, but please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Brant Adams, 308 East Emma Street, Tampa, 33603.
Thank you.
I'm pastor of Seminole Heights Baptist Church, and as Julia just said, that it would be extremely expensive even if you wanted to adapt it. Just rest assured and let everybody know this building will either be a church or it won't be. It is not the pleasure of the congregation that this thing be anything but a church. So that's what it'll be. There's no, we are the property owners. There is no desire, there is no thing for anything in that red brick building to be anything except a congregation of believers gathering together. It will not be apartments, it will not be anything else. That is, my church here, that is what they've said. So I'll get into that. And I'm going to read now because I'm a little excited, I'm a little energetic, and when I feel like we're being pushed around, I get a little defensive of my church. My church, the people. And so let me read it and I'll get out of your way because I don't want to take all your time. So, as I said, I'm pastor of Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I've been pastor of Seminole Heights Baptist Church for 5.5 years. My family has had the great pleasure of walking alongside of this church for 7.5 years in different capacities. I've baptized children in this building. I have a child that knows only this building as the place where her church family gathers. That is the significance of this building. That happens to be a space where God's people, God's church, gathers together. Those who call upon the name of the Lord Jesus as Savior worship their God. That is the significance of this building. It is not a gateway to a neighborhood. It is not a way for you to know where to turn into Starbucks. This is where we gather to worship. Seminole Heights Baptist Church has been on a plot of land since 1921. It's moved around where the sanctuary is back and forth a couple of times. You saw a picture of the wood structure that used to be a grocery store. And they gathered together there for 27 years. The Seminole Heights Baptist Church is there because in the late teens, early 20s, a group of Baptists of our denomination decided they wanted to have a place where a few Baptists could gather and worship God as they so chose. And so in 1921, the church was initiated as they did back 100 years ago. In 1949, this sanctuary was opened. It's important to know that one of our family members that are here with us is a child of the first couple that was married in that building. So people want to talk about what this building means to them. I have people here that are members of this church that are voting to move forward, or family of members of this church that have voted to move forward, that have roots. It's not just a place where they can look to know where to turn or know where their neighborhood is. They have roots there. And the church has decided on 2 occasions, I'm getting ahead of myself, I told you I get excited. The church on 2 occasions has voted to proceed with their rights as a property owner. And so in 1949, the sanctuary was opened. In 1958, there was damage due to a lightning strike. There was a fire. There was 2 or 3 fires that happened in the life of the church. One in the wood structure, and there was a couple in the building that we have now that decimated the building inside. And so you saw the Canvas Cathedral. They met in the Canvas Cathedral because they were remodeling, repairing the complete inside of the sanctuary, the worship center. And so that is when they decided to add the porch. That is when they decided to go further. You know, the American way, if lightning strikes our steeple, we're going to go prove you wrong, whatever. That's what they did. I would wish they hadn't have, but they did. Because that steeple has cost the church hundreds of thousands of dollars through the years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I don't exaggerate. And so in 1949, the original church was remodeled. In 1997, the inside of the sanctuary and where the elevator goes and some things and bathrooms was completely remodeled. The congregation, the people of Seminole Heights Baptist Church have always owned these buildings. Here's a lady sitting here that her parents helped build the buildings, paid for the buildings. There's people outside, there's people sitting over here that paid. People want to say that they want to see the building. These are the people. There's many of them in here, outside and down by the door, that are standing here wanting you to respect their rights as a property owner. And that's what this is about. As I went through the time with my church and talking and to people over the 5 years of what do we do with this building that's so expensive, one of our ladies in our church that just passed away, Miss Judy Dennison, who is recognizable in Hillsborough County, in Hillsborough High School, and she was just a part of our church and a part of the fabric of that neighborhood. I asked her, I said, why did y'all tear down those old buildings? There were several buildings on the properties that had been torn down. Why were they torn down? And you can even look in our church history, and it may even be presented to you as down with the old, up with the new. She said because 75-year-old buildings are very expensive, and they tore them down and built new. And so I asked why. In the last 8 years, I've spent more hours in this building than anyone on the face of this earth. I have pastored a church that has tried for 5 years and spent almost $1 million on upkeep and repair of this building. We are now in a building that cost $8.9 million at least to repair, with a building that is valued at $3.6 by the property appraiser in the county, and also we had an independent appraiser. I believe you have that too. We've gone our due diligence as a church, as a congregation. And as a pastor of a congregation, it's very confusing to me how people who do not contribute to a building can cause such a fuss about a building that they have no interest in financially. It is also confusing to me how a government entity can move on a church property's rights without even so much as a notice, without even letting us know that we're going to be changing your property rights. We started this process, we were shocked. It was glossed over, but I have the word possibly, but potentially eligible. Possibly, potentially eligible. We're here because something is potentially eligible, possibly eligible. No one ever asked us if they could come on our property. No one ever asked us if they could change our designation. They just ran right over us. I don't like being run over. Maybe that's why I'm a little fired up. I don't like when my church is run over. I don't like when their work is disrespected as landowners. We shouldn't be shocked to find out about a designation when we're in the process of trying to find out what we want to do with our building that we pay for. We should not be shocked when we come to a meeting. So it's very confusing. The people. That steeple is not the church. That steeple has never given one family food from our food pantry. That steeple has never pulled one tooth from our free mobile dental clinic. That church has never helped one family get on their feet. That steeple has not. It's the people. It's the people. So when I from here on out as I read, when I say church, I mean people. I don't mean a steeple. I don't mean brick buildings. I don't mean stained glass windows. I don't mean pillars. I don't mean ratty old parking lots. I mean people. The church, the people, a people that remember as kids, some as young adults, as the building going up, people who personally saved and their parents saved to lay brick, a people whose fathers actually laid the brick and poured concrete, the people who have paid handsomely through the years for the building, and still all the money was not enough. These are the people that voted on 2 separate occasions to go forward their rights as a property owner of that red brick building. The church is vehemently opposed to that building being anything but a place where God's people gather. As people with responsibility, you all know, I know as a pastor, responsibility as a father of 5. Sometimes I have people telling me what they think I should do. I have people telling me what they think is right and wrong. But at the end of the day, you and I are both accountable to do what's right. And I'm accountable to these people. So I'm going to ask, wherever you are in the building, if you're here in support of Seminole Heights Baptist Church and our rights as a property owner, if you will please stand. Wherever you are in the building, please stand. Can I let you know something? I've not had this many people in a gathering since Corona. There are people here today that have not been outside their homes, their boundaries, since Corona started. But because of this, there's people at risk that are here because it's important, because they want to see their rights honored. You can sit down. Thank you all. And so I'm almost done. And I know if you've ever been to churches, you're almost done, and the pastor's going to go another 30 minutes. Not this one. So this church, the people, want to move forward. We want to invest in the lives of more children. We want to reach out to more kids without fathers. I grew up without a father, so it's one of our niches. We've got a big debate on what's going on in society. One way to fix society is to get fathers and men involved in the lives of children. We want to get more involved in that. We were pursuing starting a school. That's how all of this started. We were pursuing to start a school, and as the school we were looking to help kids that don't have fathers and have opportunities and give them a chance to have a safe space to go to church or go to school. We discovered this building was so expensive. The school couldn't afford to retrofit it. We couldn't afford to retrofit it. And so as we pursued the building upgrade costs, they were going to be too great. So again, barriers are set forth by an antiquated building. I have heard our church does not care about the community. If that's so, why have we fed so many families in our food pantry for the last 20 years? If that's so, why would we have a free mobile dental clinic? Why would we have volunteers in a local school? Why would we support teachers in struggling schools so that they can have what they need for teaching and helping their kids? Why would we have a desire to have a school with boys and girls to help them so that they can understand what it is to be in structure and safety, and all the while continuing to help those struggling schools? All we ask is you to honor our rights as the only landowner, the only owner of that red brick building that everybody seems to love. There's a lady that loves the building. How old are you, Miss Betty?
Pretty soon, be 93.
And how old were you when you started at Seminole Heights Baptist Church? 17. And there's more of Miss Betty's. There's more of them. And they're here in support. Seminole Heights Baptist Church is special because of the people, not the building. And that's why I was here. Thank you.
Again, Julia Mandel for the record. I'd like to ask Edward Brower with the consultant firm at SME to come to the podium and just give a very brief presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Edward Browder. I'm a landscape architect and project manager with SNME, and my address is 613 Casa Marina Place, Sanford, Florida. I just wanted to introduce myself because I have given a letter of recommendation, and since it's in part of your packet, I wanted to introduce myself and just give a quick background. Our company has been involved in historic preservation efforts since the 1980s. We have an office in Charleston, Ohio, and Florida that have, as part of our many services, historic preservation. And as a company, our Florida office serves as the Historic Preservation Officer of the City of Melbourne since 2006, and we've served as the Historic Preservation Officer to the state for the City of Titusville since 2011. So I just wanted to give that little background because in my letter, I disagree with the 2019 findings that this is an excellent example of neoclassical architecture and that it meets the criterion C for National Register listing. So I just wanted to go on record that I disagree. My colleague and I, and Patricia Tayaski has way more experience than I have in this. She has an architecture degree. We both looked through Bulletin 15 from the National Park Service, and we evaluated it, and we found that criterion A, B, D, none of those really applied. When you look at the events that have gone on here, the people, the information that it could be led from this building, we have found that it doesn't meet the criteria for National Register listing. So then we looked at criterion C, and I think that's the only one that's the one that Dennis underlined, that's the one we're looking at. In our opinion, it is a good example of neoclassical revival architecture, but it takes more than being a good example to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. When we recently did a survey update for the City of Melbourne, we looked at over 318 structures, and we have to very systematically look at those against the criteria and determine, is this a good example? Would it be a good local designation, or does it hold that special place that deserves the National Register? And we have to systematically go through that. We can't look at it from emotion. We can't look at it from, is this building pretty or not? You know, it's got to be, apply the criteria to every single example. So we do, I just wanted to mention that. We do have experience in this, and in our experience, in our opinion, this is a good example, not an excellent example, and it does not meet the criteria for National Register, which is the findings that was originally checked off on the Florida Master Site file. As been noted before, there was some complications, some inaccuracies in it. It wasn't until the 2019 letter from DOT to the Highway Commission that we found out that they had changed something between 2015, 2016, and 2019. It went from being a good example and not eligible to being an excellent example and being eligible. Yet nothing changed on that building in those 3 years other than more decay, same building, same architecture, same architect, same history. So again, I would just like to recommend to you that this building does not meet the eligibility for the National Register. And I'm here to answer questions later if there are any. Thank you.
That is the end of our presentation. We will reserve time for rebuttal, and we are available to answer any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Commissioners. Now we'll start to receive public comment. As I said, we will be limiting public comment in accordance with your rules of procedure to 3 minutes. As individuals will begin public comment within this room, as individuals do speak, we do ask that you exit if possible so that other people can enter the room. We do have a cap on the number of individuals that can be in this room at one time due to social distancing recommendations. In your packets are a stack of letters that were received by our office. We processed those letters up till noon yesterday. The applicant's agent has also been provided with these letters. There are 105 letters that were received by our office, basically reflecting their opinions on the property, the designation, and your role here today. you can certainly look at those and discern which ones may be evidence that you want to consider in addition to the verbal public comment that you'll receive. So with that, I believe we'll start the public comment.
Commissioner Ortiz has a comment.
I would just like to ask that before we begin public comment, we could have a short break, maybe
Yes.
5 minutes, please.
Excellent. So the meeting is recessed for approximately 5 minutes. You may remain in here if you wish, or you may exit and into the lobby and return, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I would like to call the meeting back into session. If you could please re-enter the room, I would like to ask that those people who, for whatever reason, need to depart, if they would please be allowed to speak first. And then as you speak, if you could leave the room so that the persons in the outer lobby may have an opportunity to enter and speak in their turn. Thank you very much. It is appreciated that you have all shown up, and we are awaiting your comments. Remember that you have 3 minutes to speak, each of you, and if your comments are shorter, that will be fine. It would be appreciated if, as the speakers come up, that if you begin to repeat what others have already said, it's nice if you would just say ditto and move on, because there are so many speakers that we have to accommodate this morning. Thank you. You may begin. And make sure, make sure please that you state your name and address for the record as you speak.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Just want to make sure that we're going to do a swear-in again, just in case there was an exchange of individuals. We will be having to ask multiple times if our speakers have been sworn in.
Good morning. My name is Ellie Baggett. My address is 1316 East Ellicott Street. I'm the president of the Southeast Seminole Heights Civic Association. We are the association that includes the Seminole Heights Baptist Church property. I'm a 5th-generation Tampanian. My great-grandparents were born here. The pastor mentioned some of us have no history with this church. My grandparents were married there. Some of you may know my dad, Bob Baggett. He's a photo restorationist and restored the Burgett Brother photo collection for the Tampa Library for 40 years. I've spent my childhood looking at photos of destroyed landmarks. Binders upon binders of photos showing important buildings, now parking lots and box stores. The Hotel Tampa Terrace, the High Life Frutton, the Seawolf Restaurant, the many cigar factories. We have allowed the destruction of the historic fabric of our city. So why this church? Why this building? Why this steeple? Because a steeple is architecturally significant, and it's a symbol seen for miles. All over Europe, what's at the center of any village? It's a steeple. A steeple is a worldwide symbol of the community and the center of its culture. It welcomes visitors, and it welcomes a weary traveler home. I can leave the Tampa airport and head down Hillsborough Avenue, and on a clear day, what's in the distance to greet you? The steeple. It can be seen from miles away. It welcomes visitors into this city and welcomes us home. This structure is architecturally significant to Seminole Heights and to Tampa. This structure matters. With some help of the Tampa Bay History Center, we've been able to confirm a few historic events that have occurred on this property in this church to support our arguments that this structure is significant to the history of this city. The Seminole Heights Baptist Church, organized in 1921. In 1929, Charles Parrish, an African-American pastor born into slavery in Kentucky, preached to the Seminole Heights Baptist Church at the evening service on December 9, 1929. He later became a well-known pastor, earned several educational degrees, and became active in political and civil rights movements. In 1927, A.W. Mathis became the pastor and served for 24 years until 1951, overseeing the construction of the current standing structure. He went on to be elected president of the new organization formed in Tampa, the Baptist Ministers Conference in 1930. In John Sinchet's book, The History of Tampa Churches, the first page is a photo of Seminole Heights Baptist Church. His words read, quote, "For travelers coming into Tampa along the interstate, while the towering white steeple of Seminole Heights Baptist Church welcomes them like a lighthouse guiding ships into the night." The history of this church begins in 1921 when an organizational meeting was held by pastors representing all Baptist churches in Tampa
to establish a new church in the developing community of Seminole Heights. This church is a landmark on East Hillsborough Avenue, end quote. This church is architecturally significant. It is significant to the history of Seminole Heights and to Tampa, and it deserves landmark status. Regardless of the outcome today, the Neighborhood Association wants to work collaboratively with this church going forward on any new development, and we hope they reach out to us. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Keyports. I'm the president of the Old Seminole Heights Neighborhood Association and also the vice president of the Heights Urban Core Chamber. My comments are a follow-on to the letter submitted to the HPC yesterday. As the president of the Old Seminole Heights Neighborhood Association and acting president of the Heights Urban Core Chamber, I am present to oppose the request made to demolish the structures minus Fire Station Number 7 that occupy the Seminole Heights Baptist Church property located at 801 East Hillsborough Avenue. The Baptist Church structure, and especially the iconic church spire, are symbolic of our greater Seminole Heights neighborhood and should be listed as a local historic landmark. These two organizations' boards voted last week to support the Southeast Seminole Heights Neighborhood Association with the goal of maintaining the structure rather than allowing it to be bulldozed. Additionally, we recommend inclusion of the church and eventually Fire Station Number 7 on the National Registry of Historic Places. The church structure is architecturally significant and serves as a beacon to our residents and as a gateway, and I apologize to the pastor, to the businesses within Seminole Heights and East Tampa. Significant to the history of our area, we hope to work collaboratively with the Baptist Church and any new development to serve both today's and future generations while remaining dutifully mindful of the past. This church has distinctive character and architectural value and remains critical to the history and cultural sensitivities of this great city. Thus, it should qualify for preservation and serve as a focal point for future use, or for the spire and church building to be architecturally incorporated into any future redevelopment effort. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jack Fernandez. I reside at 3006 West Cordelia Street, Tampa, Florida. I am a born and raised native of Tampa. I have been a member of Seminole Heights Baptist Church since the year 2000 and a deacon since the year 2001. I've had the privilege of baptizing both of my sons and my wife at that church, and my son remodeled the playground for his Eagle Project. So I invested into this church, unlike some people here who will not be saying they are members. The steeple is a piece of wood and metal. I know, I spent $54,000 as the property committee chairman keeping it up there. Nobody helped us. We used money that we would have used for other purposes to keep that steeple from landing in Hillsborough Avenue. The steeple is fine. It is not the church. My fellow congregation members, we are the church. Someone said that it's going to do more harm to the community by the church coming down. I think it'll do more harm to the community if we can't feed people, if we can't provide the only mobile dental health clinic in this county that goes out to various areas to help people with dental problems. I think that'll cause more harm to the community. This building is brick and mortar. That's all it is, nothing more. We are the congregation, as my pastor said, when two or more are gathered, he is present. We have sent people to Haiti. We have sent people to other states to assist. But we cannot continue to do this and put money into this church. I've been property committee several times. I got enough gray hair to prove it. I know what it's going to cost to keep that church going. We can't do it. But we want to continue to serve our community. We have rights as property owners. We have owned that property for 100 years. People have been vile on their email comments, threatening my pastor, calling him Satan and everything else, because they don't want to see the steeple go, or they can't find their way home without the church being there because that's their landmark. I say to you today, folks, that the church itself is brick and mortar. It's what we're doing as a congregation in his name that makes a difference. And I would hope that you would see that. I love that church. I will miss that church. But God has called us to do other things in our community, and I'm going to answer that call. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Stephen King. I reside at 2820 North Morgan Street in Tampa. And I am also, like Jack, I've been a member since 2001, been a deacon since 2003. I've got married at that church in 1999, baptized 2 of my children there. My wife is the leader of the music ministry. So besides the people that might come later and have more history, just number of years, the significance of the church is near and dear to my heart. Also, similar to Jack, having been and currently the property committee chair, I can tell you that the upkeep of the property is significant. It is a burden. It actually takes valuable money that we could use to feed more people, tell more people about the gospel of Jesus, and help. We spent 2 or 3 years ago, or however many years ago it was, we spent over $200,000, I think, on a roof repairs. So it's it's not viable long-term solution, and it's looking at it and knowing that it's not significant, and like I said, there's nobody that has more history than me, but or as many memories of watching your kids grow up there, and the only church that my oldest is 17, the only church he's ever known. So it'll be sad, but sometimes in life, things change, and God calls you somewhere else, and it's, like you said, as property owners, we just want to exercise our rights to move on, like you would if somebody came and offered you more than your house was worth. You would, I would assume you would probably jump at it if you were ready and you felt it was time to move. So, thank you.
My name is Bonnie Binky. I live at 14203 Village View Drive, Tampa, Florida. My parents were married in the original wooden structure. When they built the church in 1949, my father was one of the first ones baptized in the church. That's the same year I was born. I was married in that church later in '68. When they refurbished the inside of the church later, my daughter, sitting over here, was the first bride to be married in the renovated church. We have a lot of history in my family with Tampa. I was born here. We have 4 generations all alive now that were born in Tampa, Florida, at St. Joseph or Tampa General. My great uncle put the stars in the ceiling at the Tampa Theater. Chamberlain High School was named after one of my aunt's fathers. I love old buildings. I have a pew in my home from the 1949 church after it was renovated. So it's not that I don't like old things, but the church, like our pastor said, is the people. And they cannot keep up the building. I wish they could. When I was a child growing up, living on Branch and Giddens, before they built the interstate, I could walk to church. That was my sisters and my life, was school and church. Now we couldn't do that anymore because they built the interstate. But I'm just imploring you to please listen to what the people of the church, who are the owners of the property, say and what they want. Thank you.
I'm Larry Hopkins. My address is 1611 East Kirby Street. And I've been going to the church since sometime in the 1990s, so nobody is more sentimental about that building than I am. I grew up in Sulphur Springs. And I remember the Springs Pool. I remember the Springs Theater and the arcade and all of the things that existed back in the 50s. I remember the drive-in theaters, the drive-in restaurants, and the drive-in theaters. I remember the muscle cars. And I can tell you, from my opinion, there was never anything more beautiful in the Industrial Revolution than the muscle cars of the 50s. I have very sentimental memories of all those things. I remember all the fun we had going to the drive-in as teenagers, going around to the drive-in restaurants and all the things that were so pleasant back then. And so I understand the desire to keep some of that old culture and stuff like that. I know it's pleasant, but our library is full of pictures. If anybody really has a desire to live in the 50s, they can go to our Tampa Public Library and get all the pictures they want of everything that happened in the 50s and the 40s, and clear back to the time when the Gasparilla first started in the early 1900s. That's all recorded, and it's available to see. It's available to go back and look at and reminisce over if that's what you like to do. But excuse me. What I'd like to point out is that our church has a food bank, and we've had years in the past where we provided 300,000 pounds of food to the poor of the community. We have a truck, and it's set up as a dental clinic. And we go around and we give free dental care to the poor. Last year, we provided over $200,000 of dental care and health care, as well as spiritual care to people, and it didn't cost anybody that got it one dime. We have a ministry where we go to an elementary school and we provide them with educational materials, and we hold lunches, and we do all kinds of things for them to help those children grow up to be compassionate, well-rounded citizens.
Can you please conclude your remarks?
Okay, the only thing I want to say is the community will be far better off by allowing us to continue doing what we've been doing and not be hindered by a requirement to live in the past. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Tamasoff. I live at 3707 North 12th Street in Tampa. I'm also a native Tampanian, third generation. And my family and I have been members of Seminole Heights Baptist for more than 10 years now. We first came to the church as a hurting family. We spent a lot of time there as a hurting family, being surrounded by the wonderful people who genuinely love and care, not just about those in their inner circle, but about everyone they meet, has been wonderful. It's been very healing. Now, only having been a member for 10 years, that means that the majority of my life, I was like many of the people who have concerns about the sale or the demolishment of the building. I saw that steeple every day for the 29 years I lived before I became a member. So I get that. Aesthetically, it's beautiful. But as I've said recently and continue to believe, for many people, it is a very passively consumptive interest in the building. It's a footnote for them. It's a landmark for them. But as much as they might care about the outside of the building, there's probably a great many of them who could not care one bit about what goes on inside the walls. They don't want any part of it. They don't care. They disagree with it. And we're all free to do that. We're all free to have those opinions and feelings. But I will tell you that when I was heartbroken and my children devastated because their father left, it was not that building that came to my comfort. It was the people inside. When I lost my job and we didn't have any food, because we all know unemployment is not effective right now, it was my church family who was bringing us meals. It was not that building. When our air conditioner went out the same month that I lost my job, it was the church family, the people who were coming to my aid with a portable air conditioner and hooking it up and making sure it worked so that it wasn't 84 degrees in my kitchen. The building is a building. And if I were not in the position I am now, maybe I'd feel just like some of these other people. Maybe I would be outraged that another piece of our history was going to go away. But as someone on the inside, someone who's had to choose, do I get this thing that I wanted for my children? Do I make this payment to this bill? Or do I give extra money to the building fund because we need a roof? If you haven't had to make those decisions, if you haven't had to personally invest in what the care and maintenance of that building has costed financially, physically, spiritually, Seminole Heights Baptist owns the building. We're the owners. That should hold a lot of weight. Anybody else has a passive interest because it's aesthetically pleasing to them, because they get a consumptive gratification out of seeing it, out of knowing where to turn, out of the memories that their grandparents had. But yet they couldn't even tell us what color the carpet is. Haven't been through the doors. Don't engage with us, don't want anything to do with us, or what we do or what we stand for, as is their right. But we're asking you to be aware of our rights and to be aware of the fact that we have sacrificed, we have hurt, we have agonized. A lot of us have cried over this decision. But time and again, we've come back to what is God's will. And we believe we're doing what God's will is. And no matter what happens here today, God will be glorified. And those of us who follow him will glorify him, hopefully with our words, our actions, and everything moving forward. Thank you.
I would like to remind, please, the speakers, we don't have like a 30-second warning available in this building. So if you could please be mindful that that little beep that you hear is the termination of your remarks. And if you haven't completely finished, please draw your remarks to closure quickly. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Janine Stokes, and I am a member of Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I represent 4 families that built Seminole Heights Baptist Church: Bernard, Max Swain, Morris, and Stokes. Half-wittedly, I remark that if all the grandfathers that built that steeple had have actually been on that steeple, they would have each hammered 1 nail. My family built Seminole Heights Baptist Church. The pearls that I wear today are my grandmother's. She held me in her arms, and I sat next to her in that church. The pearls were my distraction, not to disrupt the congregation. I'm very talkative. I wore them today to explain to you that my grandmother was born in 1914 in Cuba. She came here for freedom, one of them being religious freedom, one of them being property owners, as her property was taken by the government. These pearls mean the world to me. I wear these pearls to my son's weddings. I wear these pearls when I'm at an event. That is my heart. Today is my heart. I am the legacy of a Cuban immigrant. We own the property at Seminole Heights Baptist Church. She fought to have us born on this land where we can have rights for religion and owning property, and that's what my pearls represent. Moving forward, my father is 81 years old, and he is a coronavirus survivor. He took the time in his healing to write a letter to you today. He also has been working since he was 12 years old and is a deacon emeritus of Seminole Heights Baptist Church. He still contributes financially to Seminole Heights Baptist Church. Please hear his words respectfully. Historic Preserve Office and City of Tampa neighbors, I think it is imperative that I recognize the importance of the church and the state and the role that private citizens, government entities, and religious establishments are to play in our great American society. Per the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, Congress shall not make laws respecting to the establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. In order for the separation of church and state to exist as the Constitution framers intended, it has to work both ways. I strongly feel that it is not the place of the government of the state of Florida, below or beyond, to impose its will upon a congregation of Generational Family Church. I am 81 years old and was raised in Seminole Heights community at 208 West Hannah Avenue. I raised my children in the Seminole Heights community as well, with a great focus of our time as a family being spent at Seminole Heights Baptist Church for years and years. A common misconception of Seminole Heights Baptist Church is that the church building is the original historic site. He goes on to ask you to respect the rights of the property owners and the generational family members that have built it with its right to proceed as God would have us to proceed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalia Mohabir. I'm a local resident in Southeast Seminole Heights, and I just want to express my opinion and oppose the decision to demolish the South.
Excuse me, can you adjust her volume? I honestly can't hear her.
Should I repeat?
Yes.
Can you start her time again, please? Thank you, I'm sorry.
That's okay. My name is Natalia Mohabir. I am a local resident at Southeast Seminole Heights, and I'm here to express my opinion regarding the notice that I received as a neighbor. I want to express my opinion and oppose the decision to demolish Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I feel that our duty as local resident at Southeast Seminole Heights, as a resident of City of Tampa and American citizen, our duty is to protect our history for our children. Thank you.
My name is Angela Stutz. I reside at 8413 Boxwood Drive. I am the director of preschool at Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I've been a member there since 1989. I was married there, had all three of my children baptized there, and my grandchildren attend when they're in town now. I appreciate the local residents because I do live outside of the Seminole Heights area, even though I still attend after all these years, and their feelings about appreciation for the outside building. What they don't know, because they are not members of the church, is what the inside of the building looks like. The storm that we had a few years ago, the wind and the rain went right through that brick mortar that everyone's showing on these pictures. They don't show the damage inside. And the money that we try to raise, it's still not repaired all the way. They don't understand that when we cook breakfast for the church family, we have to time what we turn on and what we heat up so we don't trip the breakers and shut off the power inside. I really appreciate everyone's, emotional attachment to the outside of the building, but we are the church. It's our building, and we can't keep it up. And honestly, the city of Tampa can't either. I appreciate everyone's comments about wanting to keep the architectural structure and the visibility. Coming down Hillsborough from past Tampa Airport, I see it coming in. I understand, it's my landmark. But I also understand for us to be able to continue to do what we do best, we can't keep that building up. Please understand that we're the property owners and it's our choice. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Nafziger, and I reside at 7217 San Luis Court in Tampa. And I am actually associate pastor for small groups at Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I've been at the church for 4.5 years. It was where I was ordained as a pastor. It's a loving congregation. It's a congregation that truly cares about the community that it's in, contrary to the vitriol that's being spread about us. As has been mentioned, we've been out in the community, and we are out in the community. But a building is just a building. I've been in Tampa all my life. I was born and raised here, graduated from King High School and HCC. And I've seen, as many of you have, buildings come and go. The old has to make way for the new. As our attorney has mentioned and shown pictures, there's plenty of other examples of churches with that classical architecture. And we don't necessarily need a rundown building that looks fine from the outside, but as many of us have said, it's falling apart on the inside. You're more than welcome to come visit us when all the coronavirus settles down and see what it looks like. We would rather be able to put that money to use to help the community, to help press out the gospel of Jesus Christ, rather than spend it on a building. When we spend more money on a building than we do actually being able to help the community, there's something wrong with that. Something fundamentally wrong with that. And we, as we've expressed, we just want our rights as a property owner to be able to do what we want. We've never asked for historical designation. We don't want it. We don't want it. We just want to be able to do what we can as a property owner. And we will continue to do good no matter where we are as Seminole Heights Baptist Church. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Harris, 1011 East Idlewild Avenue. I've been a member of that church since 1978 when I married my husband. My mother-in-law has been in that church for over 70 years. We know the community doesn't always agree, but one thing I want to say is the steeple is an icon. The Bible says we are not to worship icons. We need, as a church, to be able to have our property rights so that we can do good for the community and be able to, it's too expensive to maintain that building with the lack of people we have. If people are so worried about it's an icon, oh, this building, why aren't they in that church? Why aren't they in there contributing? That's what we need. This community has fallen apart these last few months with the riots, the protesting, the virus. The church is what keeps us together. Our church calls our members every week to make sure, are we okay? But we're asking for our property rights to do what we need to do best. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Eric Laney. I currently reside at 27207 Black Hawk Drive in Wesley Chapel, Florida. I am the teaching pastor at Restoration Church in Wesley Chapel. Previously, I was a minister on staff at Seminole Heights Baptist Church. I'm giving you comment today in addendum to written comments that I submitted. If you refer to those, you'll see an additional bit of history. But the point that I'd like to make for you today is that I was a member and active at Seminole Heights Baptist Church for over 43 years. My parents were going to that church when I was born. When I left in 2013, it was because my family and I were called to ministry in a different neighborhood, but I've maintained a good relationship with those who are still there. Having done ministry in that building, I know what goes on inside. But the real point is that, as you know, with your background as architects and planners, every building is built for a purpose. The purpose of a place of worship is to serve as a focal point for the community, as a rallying point for those who share those beliefs, so that they can conduct their activities in an organized fashion. That's why church buildings are held somewhat differently in the historical register and the criteria that they have to meet. The idea of a church building to be an historical location has to be weighed against what happens with the other activities that would take place there. And yes, the community does benefit from having a place that is a focal point. I remember my sister and I, we would play games trying to see who could be the first one to see the steeple as we came down the road. But at the same time, does the community benefit more from having a focal point that is just a building, or a focal point that is a group of people? The rights of the property owners to conduct their organization and their activities, I believe, outweighs the cost of maintaining the building and the benefit of a building that, as we've heard, is not a very good example of architectural significance. I thank you for your time. I yield the rest of my time.
Excuse me, I think we may need to administer the oath one last time.
Yes. And my name is Pastor Roger Bunner. I reside at 1810 West Sitka in the area 33604 zip code. I've lived there my entire life, so I'm coming speaking not as a pastor or a member of the Church of Seminole Heights. I am just a friend of their Pastor Brandt, but I've lived in this area my entire life, and I have seen the church and been to it through different functions over the years. So while I do love and think the steeple is beautiful and the church is very nice looking from the outside, as a pastor, I also know that the building is not the church, it's the people. And we can't worship the building. My personal church that I pastor was just vandalized 4 weeks ago and received over $50,000 worth of damages that we're trying to recover from. My church will survive because it's the people, not the damage done to our building. And so I am here to support the members of Seminole Heights Baptist Church and their rights as property owners to do what they want, and as believers to continue to do ministry as they feel. Because if they pour all this money into maintaining a building, they can't do the ministry that they need to do. Just like I'm having to face not doing ministry to repair broken buildings. So I just want to encourage you all to realize, as a longtime Tampa native, born here, and someone who's lived in the area who does respect the beauty of the building, the church needs to be able to do what it needs to do as its rights as property owners and as a ministry to continue ministry. So I'm not a member of their church, but I just feel that even the neighbors can recognize that this church needs to do what they need to do. Thank you very much for your time.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Thomas, and I reside at 805 East Giddens Avenue. I have lived in this neighborhood for over 10 years. I could have moved anywhere in the Tampa area, and I chose this area due to the situation of how they repurpose and reuse old buildings. It is historical. I hear a lot of people from the congregation speak about how they are in economic hardship, and my heart feels for them, but this is not what we're here for. We are here to determine whether this is a historic building and if it can be reused and repurposed. Historic means old and worth the trouble. We are a neighborhood, and this building is a reminder of our complexity and our culture in this neighborhood. Its dramatic effect is how most of us know that we are almost home. Preserving our historic sites is a one-way street. There is no chance to renovate or save a historic site once it is demolished. We need to bring to light the importance of saving these buildings with historic significance like this one. Once it is destroyed, it is gone forever. Thank you and have a great day.
The other podium, please.
Good morning. My name is Regina Wilson, and I reside at 800 East Frierson Avenue at the corner of Talaferro and Frierson. And I'm here because I oppose the selling and the demolish of this historical landmark. I bought my home 16 years ago, and I love my neighborhood, and I am concerned at this point what new development might come in to change Seminole Heights area. And I'm asking that the city council keep this property as historical and deem it as historical and not be really concerned of the value of the architect. And pretty much that's it. Thank you.
I don't think that got cleaned.
That one hasn't been, this one hasn't been, neither one of them have been sanitized. If I might add at this point, if there are any persons in the outer foyer who wish to speak, they can please enter the room and we will know that there are others waiting. Can they hear us out in the foyer? Oh, okay.
Hi, my name is Amy Walsh. I live at 807 East Giddens Avenue, directly adjacent from the church. My husband bought the house 15 years ago, and I have lived there for half that time. And I do not attend the church because I have different religious beliefs. I have been inside because that is our voting precinct. I also participate in the community garage sales that they've had at the church. I'm not here to discredit their good that they have brought to the community. I respect whatever decisions, that they want to do with the building, but as a resident of the neighborhood, I would hope that they would, take in the effects that it will change our neighborhood, especially if it does become a medical facility with ambulances, and that would be very disruptive, and our property would probably be, undesirable after that. Listening to sirens all throughout the night would not be ideal. So I just hope that they do keep in mind the community that they would be leaving behind. All right, thank you.
Use this one, please. Can this one be sanitized while he's speaking?
My name is Jack Young. I reside at 5113 North Nebraska Avenue, Tampa, Florida. So I am a Seminole Heights resident. I have been for about 3 years, and I've been a member of the church for like 7 years, but I've gone since I was a teenager. And we are here to determine that if it should be deemed as a historic local landmark, whatever the proper phrasing is. And working in construction and looking at the building myself, and as everyone has already attested to, the cost of keeping the building updated is astronomical. To me, it just doesn't look that appealing, which hurts to say because I've spent many hours on work days cleaning the building out, doing repairs, trying to fix the sanctuary after we had a huge storm. But honestly, even if you spend all the money to keep it and to save it, If it becomes a medical building, if it becomes something else later, which we will not allow it, as the property owners to go into any other hands, other if it's going to be demolished or to be a church, you might see a big steeple, and it might be a medical building per se. If people get their way, or some other building, it's still not going to serve the community in the same way. And I believe that should be in consideration as to what the purpose of the building might be. I know we're here to deem it historic based on its looks, but looks can be modified. As we have seen earlier on in the meeting, it's been modified for over 100 years. What happened if we never repaired the steeple and we had this little stub there? Would we be even having this conversation? What happens if we decided to spray paint the brick 30 years ago neon green? Would we even care about the building? Because it would be so ugly. I just want us to think about things of that nature, that we modify and change things all the time. Sometimes we make new buildings to look like old buildings. In construction, I built a new house that looks like it's from the 50s. So should we save that building because it's only a year old? So these are things I would like for people to consider. Thank you.
Over here. Good morning. My name is Ann Hassler. I live in Apollo Beach, but I work for the mission that is supported by this church. This mission was started in 2004. The dental part of it was started in 2011. Last year, we did over $250,000 worth of free dental work in this community. Without this church, there would be so much work that is not done for no charge in this community. The steeple is nice. I'm sure that you could probably make a deal with the pastor to buy it. But the church does not provide any tax benefit to this community. The building that could replace this building could be a big tax benefit and a benefit to the citizens around the area who don't attend the church but would probably use the services of the proposed building. Thank you.
At this point in time, I would ask that if anyone else wishes to speak, would they please come forward?
Good morning. My name is Larry Tyner, 5207 East 122nd. And that is a Temple Terrace address. I was born and raised in Seminole Heights, about a half mile from the church over 12th and McBury, is where I grew up on. I'm very familiar with Seminole Heights Baptist Church and the people there, and I find them to be a very warm and caring congregation. My interest there is that I'm a volunteer at the food pantry that Ann just mentioned. There is a lot that we've done for the community and we would love to do. It all depends on the funds. And I think really what we're looking at here, the bottom line is the upkeep of the church. I do realize that it is a historical building. I realize that. But you've got to understand, as Pastor mentioned, I think it was somebody he was talking to that said that upkeep on a 75-year-old building is just, it's tremendous. The church has had to spend an awful lot of money to try to maintain that building. And that's money that could be going elsewhere. Again, it's a caring community. At the church, they very big on the food pantry. Mission Smiles is the free dental clinic. Many of the people of the church volunteer over at Edison Elementary and help out over there. There's a lot of people there that really care. But again, to me, I think the bottom line is, are you asking the congregation to hold on to that building, an expensive building that's costing them a great deal of money to maintain? If you say that they must maintain that building, where's the money going to come from? I hear all the preservation societies and everything. Are they willing step in and to do all this, because it's a very expensive upkeep on that building. It's a very old building. Things are falling apart. They've done an awful lot of work to keep that church going, and they're still continuing to. But just the upkeep on that building is horrendous. I think that really needs to be considered, because the church really would like to move forward with a lot of things that they're doing that are quite good for the community. I was born there in 1950, just a few blocks away, less than a half mile away. And yeah, the steeple's nice, and it's, you know, the building looks real nice and everything. It gives you the warm fuzzies and everything about the historical past. But again, to require the congregation to stay there and to maintain a building that is completely falling apart is just unfair as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Again, Brant Adams, 308 East Emma Street, Tampa. Will be quick. I want you to just pay attention to that our folks are still here, because it's very important to them. We have people that wanted to be here but couldn't be here because of Corona, took all their PTO and their sick time. We have people that were here, that are here still, that haven't been to their church worship gathering together. I want you to mark and know and pay attention to who's still here. People that have paid for this building, not just people that consume it visually, but people that know this building, people that have raised their children in this building, people that have buried their parents in this building. And so I leave it at that, because we've been here long enough. But I hope you'll take notice of that and to understand and to respect our rights as the only owner of that red brick building. Thank you.
Seeing,
It appears that there are no other speakers coming forward.
so it would be the appropriate time for rebuttal by the applicant's agent.
Right. This podium, I think, is the latest clean one.
Thank you very much for your time in this matter. As you can see, the members of the congregation and the pastor feel very strongly in their opposition, which is a consideration as part of any review of this as a potential landmark designation. And so I do appreciate you and your time in listening to them. There were a few folks who did show up to express their opposition, or I guess wish that the property is designated, and there was some evidence that was put into the record as it relates to some historical events at this, potentially historical events at this property, but that is not part of what your analysis is. What your analysis is, as we described at the beginning, is really a determination of criteria, and whether or not this architecture is both distinct, significant, and whether or not it's really unique in the community as it relates to other properties. I just want to read out the definition of distinction. Distinction means the quality or state of being excellent or superior. So the question before you is whether or not this particular architectural style and workmanship at this particular, in this particular church, given the context and the historical context, meets that definition of being excellent or superior. And I also like to read out the definition of significant, defined as having or likely to have influence and effect, meaning it is something that is precious, not just to the people in this neighborhood, but in terms of honoring its architectural styling. And while again, as I said when I previously spoke, I'm a member of this community too. I live in Tampa Heights. I live around the area. I'm around this area all the time, and I understand and agree that certainly the steeple is something that you see. You see it from all over. You see it because it's next to 275, and certainly we can have an argument or a discussion as to whether or not the placing of 275 in that location just did more to damage that community than anything else, and does have an effect. But that's not why we're here. Why we're here is because you have to make the determination that this structure, this building, meets certain criteria. And it is our position that it does not. We have given expert testimony that it does not. Even the information that you have from the state of Florida doesn't go any further than identify this as being a good example of neoclassical architecture. And that's not enough. It needs to be something more. It needs to be distinctive. It needs to be significant. And for us as a community to say, we're going to affect somebody's property rights in order to make this a community asset. You've also heard the testimony as it relates to the building upkeep. And while we're not here specifically and at this point in time to discuss economic hardship, I think it does go into the workmanship and the quality of the workmanship. It hasn't really survived the test of time. It wasn't built to survive the test of time. It wasn't intended to survive the test of time. And that is why there's so many issues and problems as it relates to the building being upkept and maintained. Because you have one owner. This isn't a situation where somebody walked away from it. You've had an owner that's been chasing this property to keep it up as well as they can. It just wasn't constructed for that level of workmanship in order for it to stay and remain in its current content or location. And the final thing I want to say, just because this has come up, I understand folks are wanting to know what's going to happen, wanting to know, can this be integrated? Is there an opportunity for adaptive reuse? That is not your role, and this property has a zoning classification, and the zoning will, and other codes in the city of Tampa will inspire and define how this property could be used. And that is the case whether or not it remains with a landmark structure, if that's the decision, or it doesn't. That is another conversation for another time. The other part of this is being an adaptive reuse. That's not your role. If this is designated, it is an entire building that is designated. You can't just take the steeple and say, let's designate the steeple, which if you really listen to a lot of the commentary and you read the comments, really that is the thing that people feel viscerally about. And while we all understand that, that is not the standard. As I've said, what the standard is how I've defined it and what your role is, and it's not an easy one, but it is something that you're obligated to review and make a decision based upon the facts that exist within your record. And while, as you heard from this congregation, this is very, very deeply saddening for them. They respectfully request, and I respectfully request on your behalf, to allow them to move forward with their property in a manner consistent with how they want to use it. And if a demolition permit should be pulled, because as I said, there hasn't been one now, that there would not be a determination that this property is to be designated. Thank you, and we're available for any questions. And I really appreciate your time.
Dennis, do we close the public hearing portion of this meeting now?
You're able, if you wish to ask questions at this point. If you have no questions, you can close the public hearing and go into discussion.
All right, let's move on then to questions from the commissioners to any of the speakers who have been with us this morning. Does anyone have a question that they would like to raise?
Yes, I do have a question in regards to the upkeep of the building and the community. I have seen where Seminole Heights has expressed their concern about the steeple and the church itself. I guess my question is directed to the pastor. Has the community helped in any way to help maintain this building or the services that you have?
No.
Okay.
Was a quick answer.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions?
And also, as far as the economic hardship, have you guys tried reaching out to the city of Tampa to see if there are any funds to help with preserving?
$9 million. $9 million.
What about $9 million?
$9 million is what in your packet from us. $8.9 million, $8.89 million is what it would cost to bring that building, all the buildings up. $9 million. To answer your question, no, we haven't, because we have always, since I've been pastor, we've always desired an understanding that it wasn't designated historically. And so imagine the shock, because we've always wanted to be able to have flexibility to do with the property that we've always owned for 100 years, the building that our church built. We've always wanted the flexibility to do what we see fit as the property owner. So we've never sought historical designation because of that. And we quite honestly don't want it, because we want to be able to do with our property just like you would at your house. If you had a house and you spent some money on it and somebody wants to do something with it that you don't want them to do, you have a right to say, no, you can't, it's my house. That's what this church is saying today. This is our house. Our forefathers, some of our folks' fathers and grandfathers built it. This is our house. All we want is permission to do is we see fit. So to answer your question, no. And so for the second question, you got the preacher answer, the long-winded one.
Thank you.
Excuse me, again, this is Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. I just would like to remind the commissioners to focus on the purpose on the agenda for the applicant. And again, economic hardship is not something that the commission is going to take into consideration at this time.
Part of the folder packet. My apologies.
And I'm sorry, if I can reiterate that comment, and I want to just put in the context of the reasoning behind putting in the evidence as it relates to the structure as well as the commentary, because at this point in time, you are just looking at the objective criteria of whether or not this should be designated. That is really evidence of workmanship, and that is part of your analysis. That, as I've said, this was never built with the intent that this type of workmanship would last over a long period of time. I think that's especially important given that, unlike some other situations, this is not, a demolition by neglect, as you might be heard that term, where a property owner just walked away and just sort of let their building fall apart. That's not what's occurred here. Notwithstanding the fact that over time you had a congregation that's been in that building that had done everything that they could to keep and maintain that building. It was never built with the intent, with the type of workmanship that you would see on a building that should be lasting. And that's why I presented that evidence and testimony at this time. If we go further, we will have an opportunity to present you additional evidence as to expense of maintaining the building and what that would mean versus the property, which is the economic hardship criteria. I just wanted to clarify that so everybody understood the context of that information. Thank you.
I have a question for staff, and my question is regarding the criteria consideration for churches. The staff report goes on to say that the Southeast Seminole Heights neighborhood is not one which could potentially lend itself to a National Register Historic District. And in the criteria for consideration, the last sentence reads, churches or such properties will qualify if they are integral parts of districts that do meet the criteria or if they fall within the following categories. So I guess what I'm getting at is if the Southeast Seminole Heights neighborhood is not a national neighborhood, how does the property qualify, or this particular property qualify for consideration? I believe we're kind of going back to the local landmark designation, but I'd like some clarification on that.
Dennis Fernandez, Historic Preservation staff. Do believe that some of the wording that you were referencing was in the Cultural Resource Assessment Survey that was looking at the area as a potentially, if it could support a district. On Criterion C, that very last part of Criterion C that speaks to or that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction is emphasizing a district type situation, but that has not been a caveat of this particular evaluation. It is being evaluated by you today as an individual listing. So within a district, there was a reference to the Hyde Park Church that is also of a similar architectural style. It was built after the period of significance of Hyde Park, both the national and local register district, which ends in 1933. So anything after that particular era would not be contributing to the district, but it could potentially be individually eligible.
Thank you for that.
I have a question. I'm not sure if I should direct it to staff or to the Gray Robertson attorney, but I think I do want to direct it to you. It's just mainly the examples of the churches that you gave. And when I was looking at National Registry Criteria C, and it did say that, that or represent the work of a master. And you were saying it's not an excellent example, it's just a good example. And I guess my question is, when you looked at the other churches, how far away are they in proximity? Because if this church is like the only example in its area, then that does bring about other questions.
I'm going to answer two parts of that. Again, for the record, Julia Mandel. The first question of it being a good example, that is actually the statements that were made by the report by Janice. So that's their words, not my words, and that's what you're looking at this in terms of whether or not it meets the criteria of distinctive or significant. I provided you those other examples and what the geographic nature of how far you go out or don't go out, notwithstanding, two of the churches, Central Tampa Baptist Church is on Tampa Street in the Tampa Heights area, and the other church, I think it's in New Salem, that is actually also in Seminole Heights. It's on Nebraska. And again, I didn't do an exhaustive search of that particular area. It was very interesting to me because I drove by the Central Tampa Baptist Church and noted in my head, well, wait a second, that looks very similar. And I started to actually Google it, and I found 5 other churches within the Tampa area. Now, the Hyde Park Church and the Manhattan Church and the Bayshore Baptist Church, those are all in South Tampa. Whether or not you would take a smaller ring or a larger ring, I can't answer that question because, of course, that evidence was never brought forward in the initial report, and I just tried to provide as much context as I could find within that time frame. And our consultant, Eddie from SNME, he also came to the same conclusion in looking at it. So we're not talking about a church, though, in Plant City, and we're not talking about churches, over in even Temple Terrace. We're talking at least geographically the part of the city of Tampa that developed around the same time. Specifically, if you look at Hyde Park and the area of significance there, and I had that information, I didn't bring it with me, and Dennis probably can answer that better than I am. The area of significance in Seminole Heights is a similar time frame, an area and time of distinction as is Hyde Park. So I do think that there's synergy between looking at what was within Hyde Park. The Bayshore Baptist Church, I think, is in proximity to the Hyde Park area. The one on Manhattan, maybe it is, maybe it's not. That's certainly subject to debate, but the areas within, say, the Tampa Heights region and the Seminole Heights region, which also had Baptist churches that were built with a similar styling, outside the area of significance of each one of those historic districts, but has a similar look to it, is something you can look at to determine whether or not it is, I guess you can almost call it iconic.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I just wanted to, since it was brought up about the work of a master, which is one of the components of Criteria C, we did look at Lester W. Geisler, who was the architect for this particular church, to try to find some information on him. And I think, what we found was that this seems to be the only example of any type of project that he did in the city of Tampa that we could locate at this point. He was active in the Orlando, Hialeah area and did end up settling in Winter Haven, where he passed away in 1996. He did design the First Presbyterian Church of Miami, the Hialeah Race Course, and the Osceola Hospital. I think I didn't find any information to warrant his evaluation as a master. I think he was a very, obviously a very talented working architect.
Just to be clear, though, it doesn't have to be the work of a master. Those are oars in that
It's just a consideration, right, for that particular part of Criterion C.
I do need to make a comment on that, because I did look at that issue. Again, Julia Mandel, for the record. He is correct, the original architect was, I think, Geister. But that is not the same architect who was involved with the spire steeple or with the porch. Those were additions 10 years later. In the packet, and I didn't really get into this because it was part of the original presentation, you actually will see pictures of the original structure as the pillars are going up. And you can actually see between the pictures of 1950 and the pictures that occurred in the 60s that the original steeple was removed, part of it was removed and replaced with the spire steeple that everybody is speaking about. So while I recognize that the architect who was the original architect of this building may have had some prominence, whether he's a master or not, notwithstanding, that was, one, not the basis of the decision points that came forward with the state, but secondarily, that is not the elements that have been pointed to which make this, I guess, a good example of neoclassical architecture, or the spire steeple, which is discussed. So I want to caution that conversation, because it isn't that the original, and one might even argue the original architecture was modified from and through other types of additions, but the two elements that I think really have made up the determination of it being a good example of neoclassical architecture were not by this particular architect. Thank you.
Commissioners, are there any other questions to any of the persons who have spoken today? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing portion of this meeting, and we will move on to discussion among the commissioners regarding the petition before us today. And is there anyone, any of you who would like to begin a comment?
I can start if no one else wants to, but I'm happy to defer.
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and you know, we usually have one or two people in the audience for these meetings, so we appreciate the passion on both sides. It's heartwarming to hear how much the church means to the congregation, the pastor. It's heartbreaking to hear how much of a burden it seems to have become to maintain the church, especially relative to the church's mission. But it seems to me, as several people have pointed out, that you know, our question today is really just focused on this issue of the eligibility of the property for the National Register of Historic Places. And economic hardship is for another meeting, potentially. So to me, we have ample evidence that it is eligible for the National Register under Criterion C. We have the JNS report that was done, the concurrence from the Florida DOT, the statement from the highest historic preservation office in the state, Dr. Parsons. It doesn't matter that the steeple's not original. It doesn't matter that there are alterations. Perhaps most National Register structures have alterations. Sometimes it's the alterations that make the property eligible. It doesn't matter that it's not part of a district. The Seminole Heights district is defined more narrowly to the period before World War II, so it's obviously not a contributing to the district under that criteria. It doesn't matter that there are other churches in the area, I mean, of the same style. This is something that historic preservationists do consider, but you know, we can't not call a property eligible because there are a few scattered elements, especially when we don't know if there are protections in place. Nobody's established if those are protected properties. That would be something I would consider. If there were abundance of properties of the same style that were already protected. And it doesn't matter that there was a clerical error in Janice's report. I've done thousands of site forms for the state of Florida. It's easy to make a clerical error on those electronic forms. Clearly, the intent of the survey report was to call it potentially eligible. And again, the DOT forwarded that recommendation to the state, and so to me, on the narrow issue of eligibility, I think it is eligible under criterion C.
Any other comments? Would other commissioners care to make a remark?
Oh, yeah. I would agree on the narrow criteria because I was considering if there's other buildings in the area that are of the same style, built around the same time, with more, I guess, superior craftsmanship, but not really. It's more like more artistic craftsmanship or what have you. But brought up a great statement that if there were, we don't know if those are protected either. So then it's like, can't really just demolish something because it's not pleasing or it's hard to keep up or maintain. And I do understand the congregation too, because I understand how that could be a burden on our congregation because older buildings are really expensive. And their materials are not inexpensive either. But I understand too that when something is built so long ago, it becomes a part of the community. It just becomes a part of the community. It's interwoven. So I understand also the community's part in wanting to keep the building there because it's a part of the community's identity. So I would agree that it is eligible because of the time it was built and the style that it was built in. And I do want to state that the additions actually contributed to the structure because it was built in the additions were built in the same architectural style. So it didn't take away from it, it enhanced it. So that's my take on it.
Ms. Ortiz, would you like to, do you have any comment to make?
I mean, my thoughts are that the architecture at this location, we're asked to measure that, is it distinct? And I have to say, based on the definition of distinct that the applicant has provided us, excellent or superior, I don't think that this is an excellent or superior rendering of the neoclassical architectural style. Is it significant? Sure. People in this neighborhood do believe that this church influences them and has an effect on them, but I do go back to the architecture of this location, and I don't believe that it is an excellent or superior example.
I do agree with Commissioner Ortiz also. Given that this is an iconic structure in the area, I do not see where the building stands out from the other ones that were presented. It does meet the criteria, but I do not think it is very distinct compared to others. I do also feel for the public, having this structure in this area for such a long time. Again, that was a lighthouse to me, also coming in and out of the city. But what is the purpose for this area, or if it can be repurposed? But I do agree that I do not think this is a structure that is so significant that it has to stay.
I have been pondering this question ever since the issue was even raised some time ago, and it's unfortunate, it's significantly unfortunate that the building has deteriorated to whatever point it may have been deteriorated. The Architectural Review Commission of the City of Tampa oftentimes reviews demolition requests within the historic districts, and many times those requests are brought forward because of a lack of maintenance and repair work over time on these these buildings. I heard earlier in the proceedings that someone made a comment that a building is just a building. Well, to preservationists, a building is not just a building. It is, these buildings are the cultural history of our community and our society, and they need to be preserved and treated delicately as time passes. And I understand the position that everyone here has raised, but to trivialize an historic building because of the function that occurs within the building may to many people seem more important than the building itself is not really a reason to bring forward as a legitimate argument for the lack of preservation of a building. The fact that 75-year-old buildings are expensive to operate, I live in an 115-year-old house, and I can certainly attest to the fact that it requires constant maintenance. And I would like to make just a general comment to all of the members of the parish that churches are iconic in neighborhoods, regardless of the church. They are cultural resources for communities, and they are very important in their own right, no matter which church or whose church it is. So, and I know that over time, I can see the painfulness in your eyes when you made your comments about the fact that this was a very difficult decision for your church to have arrived at. And that too can be appreciated. I have been torn because while I recognize that the architect who originally did the building was not the architect who apparently put the additions on, there was no evidence that he was later involved in that process. And while he did study under Addison Meisner, who is a significant architect in the architectural history of the state of Florida, Mr. Geisler himself did not go on, frankly, to create a body of work that is reasonably comparable to that of Addison Meisner's. So for that criteria, I don't believe we have much of an argument to allow for the work of the architect as a means to justify the demolition. I probably closed the public hearing a little bit too soon because it seems to me in my dealings with preservation work that the sanctuary itself could be saved as a building without saving the adjacently built structures. And I should have posed that question earlier. So Dennis, could you make a remark in that regard?
Are you, Madam Commissioner, are you asking to reopen the hearing for?
Is that what I would need to do to get Dennis to make a comment?
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
I will reopen the public hearing and pose the question to the staff.
Can you repeat your question?
Is it legitimate that the original sanctuary structure, which is primarily sounds like the conversation that's gone on here, could be separated from the two Sunday school buildings and and that alone could be designated exclusive of the rest of the building.
I think there are a couple of different ways to look at this. Is you have evidence in front of you that was completed by the cultural resource company that evaluated the entire site and found
Okay.
Potential eligibility for the entire site, less the 1970s education buildings. I also believe that most of the emphasis has been focused on the sanctuary. Architecturally, it's being described at a more detailed extent than the education building has been. Of course, they're built originally at different phases, and with the modifications and the expansions, then they somewhat come together in the late 50s. But you can formulate your recommendation how you see fit, given the evidence that's been presented.
All right.
I think once you've opened the public hearing, I believe Ms. Mandel is now able to comment.
Please.
Again, Julia Mandel, and I've worked with you for a long time, and I respect what you're saying. I had an opportunity to speak with my client about that issue, some of the economic hardship issues, and just sort of listening to the conversation. Perhaps, and not to continue to draw this out, but I understand it's a hard decision. Perhaps the thing to do would allow a continuance for us to look into the issue that you've raised and to bring forth our evidence as it relates to economic hardship, so we can have that also heard, because I did not bring that here because unlike some of the other situations, there hasn't been a determination that the criteria have been met. That being said, in listening to the conversation, and I'm feeling that you're have some questions. Why don't I suggest that we go ahead and continue this hearing to allow first the question that you raised to be responded to, both from a legal perspective and from a procedural perspective, and secondarily to bring forth our evidence as it relates to economic hardship. You have some of that evidence in your record, but there's additional evidence that we would need to provide you. So I propose that as a solution. We would go ahead and accept and request that continuance to allow that to continue so that you have that further information as it relates to these questions. And I should note for the record that this was also noticed for the economic hardship portion of that, but after speaking with the city attorney's office and with Mr. Fernandez, because this is a situation where the designation question hadn't been answered yet, it was making it very difficult for us to obtain that information. So we would be bifurcating that question anyways. Thank you.
So, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Ms. Mandela, can you just clarify, are you asking the commission are we continuing to bifurcate the hearing, or are you asking to continue the purpose of the application?
I'm asking for both. Because of the questions that were just asked as it relates to just looking at the certain area of the sanctuary, as well as going ahead and bringing forth the evidence on the bifurcated issue of the economic hardship. So I would be asking if that was the determination that it was eligible for designation, I would have been asking for that continuance anyway. So I think given the fact that Ms. Salaga has asked, I think a question that we would like some time to think about and be able to respond to, I think that would be acceptable and appropriate.
I have to say I wasn't asking it as a means of consideration for economic hardship. I was simply asking it as from an architectural perspective, because that is what we are here to determine.
Oh, and I understand what you're saying. The problem is procedurally this sits in front of you as an entire building, and we are the ones that brought the application forward. So if there is a question on that, and there is some either opportunity to make a different decision on the way our application is brought forward, I think we should be able to do that. And if it's something that you want to have more information on, we would really need to have the opportunity to continue on that basis.
No, I don't think that would be necessary. Thank you. Dennis, you appear as if you have a remark to make?
No, I'm just postured for multiple outcomes, so you
And I think this is, and I said this at the beginning, and this is important, and that's why I was suggesting that if you wanted to explore that issue, you know, we would be happy to take some time to explore that issue. That being said, you're not looking at this building just that one area. You have to look at it as a whole, and it also is inclusive of the property as a whole. Because I know that there has been conversations about those issues, and I just want to make that clear for the record.
All right. Is there anyone else who has a comment to make? Any other further comments?
I mean, are you asking for public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. I'll close the public hearing again at this point in time and turn back to the commission.
Before we went off on that, I'd like to address the issue of distinct. Like, that is not actually in the criteria except as distinctive. So the criteria at the local level and at the National Register criteria don't say a property has to be distinct. They say what staff is invoking is that the property embody the distinctive characteristics of a type. So it has to have the architectural elements of a type, those elements that make a type a distinct entity, not that the property has to be distinct.
It's the building.
Madam Commissioner,
Yeah,
Marian Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Are we going to address the applicant's request for, is the board going to continue the matter, or that's what the applicant is asked?
Is asking for a continuance, but her continuance was to bring forward the economic hardship considerations, and those, we were instructed at the beginning of this hearing that those are not to be taken into consideration in our deliberations. So
Let me just address, maybe I confused you. Slaga, you had asked a question as it related to whether or not the sanctuary part of the building could be separated for the purposes of a designation or a preservation. And what I wanted to have an opportunity, if that was an exploration that the commission wanted to move forward with, and I say that because I respect you and worked with you for many years, that I wanted an opportunity to explore that. If that's not something that this commission wants to explore, then that part of the continuance is not necessary. But I raised it because I wanted to give an opportunity for that level of exploration. Notwithstanding that, if this commission makes a decision that it meets the criteria, which I would disagree doesn't include distinction, it actually is part of the criteria, it's a significant part of the criteria, because you're looking at this from a criteria perspective, not not eligibility, criteria being complied with, then we would then ask for the continuance of the second part of the hearing, which is the economic hardship part, which we did not bring forward and have bifurcated because we have not had a determination yet as to what that means, whether or not the criteria have been met, which was another reason why I suggest the idea of continuing for what you had raised, because I thought that that would be part of that analysis as well.
all right.
I have a...
To your point, I guess, and I don't mean to further complicate things, and I could be wrong, but I think if you wanted to pursue that around the issue of eligibility, we could perhaps, and I'm just raising this as like, the staff has recommended both the original the sanctuary and the education building as eligible. We could say one, not the other, potentially. Is that, if we wanted to?
I'm not sure. I thought we were looking at this as a whole,
As a property.
not piece by piece.
Well, that was the way that it was presented at the beginning, all three buildings together.
And I think answering this question, are we looking at this as a whole or piece by piece,
Right.
really will have significant outcome, so.
And that's, again, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. That's what the request was from the application, was the building as an entirety.
As an entirety.
And I'm asking the commission, the
Okay.
board, to continue to remain focused on what the application request
Okay.
was for.
Right.
Okay.
All right, then. And unfortunately, I think that as we look at the building and all of the criteria, the building itself is the only criteria that is actually up for grabs as the defining characteristics. And I, even from my own preservation point of view, while it is a beautiful building, it is not, in my opinion, that significant that it would stand out as being distinctive. And I'm sorry to say that, because I would love to preserve every possible historic building in the city if it were possible. So may I ask one of our commissioners, please, to try and put forward a motion?
I mean, I'll put forward a motion. I'm not sure it's going to.
If you can.
I'm going to put forward the motion that the property meets the criteria for designation to the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion C. Specifically for its embodiment of the distinct characteristics of the neoclassical revival style, and for its integrity in expressing those distinctive elements. And that we request the council to take emergency action to review. The city council. I think that was the second part.
There'll be, let's just go through this motion and see how this goes.
Yeah.
Is there a second to that motion? Or would anyone like to modify the motion?
I just have a quick question. And we're looking at the building as a whole, all three.
Seeing no second,
There appears to be no second to that motion
then the motion fails, dies for lack of a second.
for lack of second. Now, therefore, is there another motion to be made regarding this?
There's maybe a question first, and this would go to staff. Are we still eligible, as this case was presented to us as a whole, are we eligible to hear the continuance as offered, where we would be looking, as I understand, at specific elements of this building and economic hardship, or would that require a new application? Okay.
Dealing with a procedural issue.
Sorry.
I just want you to have a, look, I love a pretty record.
We will reopen the public hearing to hear from the agent for the applicant.
I'm going to answer both of your questions, but separately. As it relates to the economic hardship, that only comes into play if there's a determination that the criteria have been met.
Yeah.
The application in front of you is the entire criteria. As Ms. Salaga had suggested, I was prepared to explore that. I think at this point, we probably need to look at it as a whole, and then we can see where we go from there. I can say this, and although I have been very clear that this is not related to any existing or potential development of this site. Both the church is very sensitive of what this property means, as you've heard. They haven't just gone out there and marketed this property for the highest and best use or the highest and biggest seller. It is very important to them that no matter what goes there, that it's sensitive. And I also want you to keep in mind that there is another structure on here, which is the fire station, which we did remove. And there's probably a lot of different opportunities to honor that as well. So I only posture that because if that was a conversation y'all wanted to have, I wanted to respect this board, this commission enough to say, let's have that conversation, because I do think that these are really important conversations to have, but I don't want there to be some belief system that there's no interest in honoring what's been there. And secondarily, that there is another part of this which is not in front of you, but we also do have the fire station, and the fire station may actually also inform additional architecture on this area. And that's something I have been told by both my clients and have been made part of this process is something they really want to consider. And any reuse of this property, if the church no longer exists, is going to have to take into consideration how it deals with it as it relates to the fire station. So I point that out as part of your deliberations. Thank you.
At this point in time, is there a motion, or would the commission care to honor the request for continuance, or?
Just, Madam Commissioners, again, Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. The application is for the entire building. There is not an application for a separate building, for pieces of the building.
All right. So is there a motion on the floor as regards the entire building and its eligibility as an historic, its eligibility to be potentially on the National Register?
I'm trying to craft together a motion, so I might need just a second here. But if anyone else were willing to take a swing at it, I would, of course, listen. Okay. Okay, then I would like to make a motion that we approve this request based on the fact that this building in its entirety does not embody a distinctive characteristic of a type, period, or method of construction.
I second the motion.
All right, all those in favor indicate aye.
May I have a show of hands, please?
Oh, sorry?
Show of hands.
Show of hands, yeah, it's hard to hear in here. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? The motion passes. And we have a comment from the agent.
Thank you so much for your time and consideration at this matter. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments of all of the commissioners. I know this has been a very difficult decision to make.
Very.
And I would just simply, in closing, like to hope that that everyone understands that this is not a precedent, and that hopefully in the redevelopment of this property, you would be working with the community and the neighborhood, and there may be some opportunity for you all to offer significant portions of the building. And I say this because there was an elementary school also in the line of fire, or a middle school actually, in the line of fire when the highway was the exits were being remodeled. And one of the cupolas of that particular school was salvaged after much uproar from the neighborhood for the same reasons that the neighborhood has come forward to speak against your request. And I would like to think that you would all take that into consideration out of respect, because this is an historic building. No building is built to deteriorate in 50 years. I can assure you that would never be the intention of anyone constructing a building as significant as a church. A little commercial structure, yes, those can fall down in 10 years, and they have no emotional meaning and emotional connection to the neighborhoods, but this one does. And so I would admonish you, please, to take that into consideration as you continue on this journey.
I'd just like to say I second those sentiments. I think that there are some very important elements to this building that can be and should be preserved. And thank you for your time, but I think that is yes, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Got a request for open public.
Yeah. We need to move on with the agenda.
Yes.
I would just
Back
want
to
to
my
say thank
lawyer
you.
vibe. I'm sorry. I think we're outside the public hearing. I can tell you I hear what you say, and I certainly will express that as we go through this process.
I was going to say the same thing.
Thank you.
The rest, we will.
Now, at this stage, we're not finished with our agenda yet. We moved, let's see, where is it? We moved item number 4 to the end of the meeting. So Dennis, would you like to take care of that?
Is it the pleasure of the board to deal with the elections now?
Yes.
Okay. Then, in accordance with your rules of procedure, annually you elect your chair and vice chair. Currently, obviously, Ms. Salaga serves as your chair and Ms. Ortiz as your vice chair. You'll be making this election for the next year. So what I ask is for nominations first for chairperson, and that individual who's nominated express their willingness to serve in that capacity for the next year. And if they do, we can receive more nominations in that fashion. You can choose to retain your current chair, or you can nominate a new chair. That is your decision. So with that, I'll open the floor first for chairperson. Do we have nominations for chairperson?
No nominations.
I'm not sure if we don't get any. Haven't dealt with that one.
And I should probably know the answer to this question, but Vivian, are you eligible for another term as chair?
I believe yes, that's true.
I would like to nominate you for that position. If you choose to accept it, that's at your pleasure.
And I would be willing to continue if that is the desire of the commission.
Okay, we have one nomination currently for Commissioner Salaga. Is there any additional nominations? Seeing none, just a simple vote to affirm the nomination. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think I see Commissioner Ortiz, she made the motion. So.
All right.
Thank you, congratulations.
And
We'll move on to the vice chairperson. The nominations for vice chair, please.
You can nominate yourself.
I would like to nominate myself for vice chair for historic preservation.
Well, very good.
We have a nomination for Commissioner Cobb. Any additional nominations? And we have a vote of affirmation for that, please. So seeing that, or congratulations.
Very good.
That concludes our old business and new business, I would think, for the day. The next hearing is scheduled July 14th, 2020, at 9 a.m. in this room. Again, we are scheduled in July. If that hearing becomes necessary, I have to evaluate the agenda after this process.
All right. That having concluded all of the business of the meeting today, the meeting is now adjourned. It is 12:35 p.m.
Thank you very much.